The very air around me shattered into a million invisible fragments as my will asserted itself, an overwhelming force tearing through the fabric of reality itself. My enemies, a pitiful collection of wannabe overlords, collapsed under the sheer, brutal pressure of my aura, their desperate screams silenced before they could even form. This was my dominion, my absolute territory, and their foolish defiance was met with nothing less than my inescapable, crushing power. I felt the surge, a ridiculous, potent energy coursing through my veins, solidifying my position as the undisputed apex predator of this blighted world. There was no escape, no resistance, only the absolute, undeniable might of my presence. I once witnessed a serene sky, a tranquil green expanse where a shepherd watched over his unsuspecting flock. It was the calm before an absolute, terrifying storm. Then, without warning, the very heavens above me began to fracture, a soundless rupture that stole my breath. My own face twisted into a mask of pure, wide-eyed terror as I absorbed the impossible sight. My mouth hung open, a gaping void reflecting the void opening in the sky, as I watched the horrifying event unfold. As I stared, paralyzed by an overwhelming fear, the entire firmament above violently shattered, exploding like the most fragile glass. Colossal, jagged fragments of darkness ripped free, plummeting towards the world in a terrifying descent. Behind that monstrous, fractured devastation, an unimaginable, colossal, menacing red eye ripped into existence, burning into my very soul. It was a gaze that promised absolute annihilation. The aftermath was a bleak, shattered wasteland, with me standing amidst the falling remnants under a sky now writhing with turbulent malice. My world had been brutally invaded. The Demon King had unleashed his apocalyptic fury upon us. Countless, grotesque monsters were unleashed, a ravenous horde of pure, unadulterated evil. Their numbers were beyond any comprehension, an overwhelming tide of destruction. Then, through the oppressive, star-choked darkness, a single, impossibly pure white shape descended, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching shadow. An explosion of blinding light erupted, tearing through the hazy, corrupted atmosphere, pushing back the overwhelming gloom. These were the legendary Divine Knights, the absolute titans of faith who served my God, champions of unparalleled power. Each Divine Knight stood as an unbreakable bulwark, spear in hand, their resolve a solidified force, solemnly united against the terrifying invasion. They had sworn an unbreakable, sacred vow to my God, a promise of absolute devotion and devastating justice. Empowered by their absolute devotion, the Divine Knights manifested supernatural power, an overwhelming force that drove the monstrous legions back, scattering them like dust. For a time, majestic mountain peaks once again framed a bright, clear sky, a fragile illusion of triumph. But the malevolent demon miasma, a corrupting plague from the abyssal demon realm, still clung to my world, festering in high concentrations in isolated, insidious pockets. The landscape remained a testament to that lingering horror, dark and utterly ominous, with shadowy mountains looming under a perpetual twilight sky. The miasma's corrupting embrace was a death sentence. Most who touched it simply perished. Yet a terrifying few were not consumed by the miasma. Instead, they were grotesquely altered, twisted into something far worse. A dense, ancient forest, perpetually shrouded in an oppressive mist and suffocating shadow, loomed as a monument to that vile transformation. The rest of the world became a desolate, barren expanse, ravaged by the remnants of conflict, lying beneath a perpetually stormy, raging sky. Even amidst this desolation, eerie purple petals drifted, whispering chilling tales of ultimate conflict and decay, a grim beauty. I stumbled upon a ruined village, utterly desolate beneath that stormy sky, those chilling purple petals swirling around the broken stones. Then, from the absolute heart of that oppressive darkness, a sinister, glowing blue crystal pulsed into existence, an undeniable source of dread. A monstrous plant entity, a grotesque horror, towered over what appeared to be a deceased, severed purple head, emitting a guttural, earth-shaking sound that vibrated through my very bones. This crystal petal monster, a creature of pure nightmare, displayed its numerous, deadly tendrils, each embedded with those same malevolent glowing blue crystals, its guttural roar ripping through the oppressive air. Its blood-soaked tendrils, dripping with the lives it had claimed, covered skeletal remains, the monster emitting a chilling, venomous hiss that echoed my absolute despair. Near what remained of long, dark hair, another glowing blue crystal erupted with a sickening, audible cracking sound, a harbinger of even greater horrors. The red crystal monster, its eyes burning with malevolent red light and its monstrous tongue lolling grotesquely, unleashed an ear-splitting scream as a blue crystal brutally merged with its very skull. That horrific merging signified its complete, ultimate demonic transformation. It had become a full, unholy demon, a pure engine of destruction. But then, a sudden, blinding beam of unknown light, an explosion of pure energy, effortlessly severed the demon's monstrous head in one decisive, devastating strike. I walked through the aftermath, past the demon's severed remains, feeling the residual power. Standing before that gruesome, severed head, I myself uttered a soft, choked sound, a gasp of pure shock and grim realization. Then, an unknown, powerful figure appeared, standing upon the desolate landscape, gripping a formidable staff. His somber declaration, "We were too late," chilled me to my core. That formidable person turned, revealing a grim, utterly determined face. It was Kiran, the 9th branch vice commander of the legendary Divine Knights, a man whose presence commanded absolute respect and a terrifying power. The entire, sprawling landscape lay utterly devastated, a monument to the relentless, brutal conflict. Fallen figures and the shattered ruins of structures littered the ground beneath an oppressive, blood-red sky, a horrifying tableau of absolute loss. Suddenly, a man surged towards Kiran, his desperate calls tearing through the ominous silence, signaling yet another impending, horrifying confrontation. The overwhelming report declared it first. Then the terror consumed the very sky as the massive red moon ripped into existence. It poured a deep crimson glow over everything, painting the world in a horrifying shade of blood. They screamed, knowing its arrival was the undeniable sign that a monstrous, powerful demon would soon breach their reality. Kiran's face, etched with a raw, intense reaction, reflected the pure dread of the moment. Then, a chilling thud echoed, a sound that shook the very foundations of their desperate courage. Kiran, with his trembling companion, cautiously advanced towards a ruined building, an ominous structure where pulsating, glowing red crystals floated in defiance of gravity. He declared the demon was emerging from its core, his voice barely a whisper of urgent caution. A man, his face pallid under the hellish light, expressed deep concern, pleading with them to retreat to headquarters, to escape this nightmare under the red-lit sky. Another man desperately warned them that the oppressive red moonlight was pouring in, urging absolute caution. Despite the primal warnings, a hand, trembling with a forbidden curiosity, tentatively reached out towards the malevolent glowing red crystals. Kiran reacted with absolute, profound surprise. What he found in that desolate, red-lit room, amidst the raw devastation, was not the roaring terror they anticipated. It was me, a helpless human baby. Kiran's shock was palpable, an overwhelming wave as my wide, innocent eyes stared up at him. 15 years blazed past in a single, silent breath. A gleaming white castle, its towering turrets piercing the brilliant sky, stood majestically among lush, vibrant trees, a beacon of a seemingly peaceful era. Inside, a bustling cafeteria teemed with people, their hushed whispers filling the air as an unseen speaker dictated their reality. It was an orphanage cafeteria, a place of stark contrasts, where the speaker declared with unwavering authority that their peaceful meals, their very existence, were all due to the overwhelming might of the Divine Knights. The address concluded, a chilling command urging all occupants to eat with enforced gratitude. Suddenly, my voice sliced through the manufactured peace, calling out to the server. I, a mere child with white hair, looked up in stark disbelief. My meager food portion was an insult, a blatant dismissal of my inherent needs. My name is Laika, and even then, I felt the injustice. I presented my tragically small meal to the server, who actually showed a flicker of distress, a rare crack in their composed facade. My mind swirled, a maelstrom of thoughts churning beneath my calm exterior. A hidden emotion, a surge of power I couldn't yet define, threatened to erupt. But I dismissed my surprise, muttering that it was nothing, a mere tremor before an earthquake. Across the room, a group of privileged kids at another table feasted, their portions enormous, their laughter echoing in my ears like a mocking taunt. I remained in the background, a solitary figure, eating alone, my existence a stark contrast to their frivolous joy. My gaze became contemplative, my heart heavy, as I quietly stated my own name again, Laika. My origins were shrouded in fire and blood. My village, a vibrant testament to life, had burned, engulfed in destructive, ravenous flames. A demon, a creature of pure malice, had attacked when I was but a baby. The entire village was annihilated, reduced to devastating ashes. I was the sole survivor, an anomaly, taken in by the very Divine Knights who had pledged to eradicate such horrors. They raised me in their stark, unforgiving facility, a constant reminder of the chaos I had narrowly escaped. I often reflected on my past, a deep, unsettling suspicion festering within me. It felt impossibly strange for a baby to have survived alone, a sentiment shared by everyone who knew my story. My internal struggle was a relentless, crushing weight, a battle I waged against my own enigmatic existence. I pondered how the world, how they viewed my large, undeniable birthmark, their eyes burning with the conviction that it was irrefutable proof I was a monster. Then a hand, devoid of respect, reached for my bowl. I considered the immediate implications, the spark of outrage igniting deep within me. This insolent being poured a lumpy substance from my bowl, making a messy, disgusting splash. Holding their own bowl, they looked down at me with an utterly scornful expression, declaring with venomous words that that food, my stolen portion, was more than enough for a monster. I was suspected of being a monster. The very air around me crackled with their disdain. All the children in this facility, I knew, had lost their families to the very demons or monsters they believed I embodied. The 3 kids at the table, their faces twisted with an intense, burning hatred, glared directly at me. I recognized their immense animosity, their absolute loathing towards me, their suspected monster. Just then, a voice cut through the tense air, calling out to someone, ordering him to come closer. My story, my true reign, was about to begin. He glared at me, his voice a low growl, speaking of a child who had only just arrived mere days earlier, his entire world already shattered. The small boy stood there, his tiny hands desperately rubbing at his swollen, tear-filled eyes, a raw wound in human form. Then came the venomous accusation, spat directly at me, that the child's parents had been brutally devoured by a monstrous entity, one vilely cloaked in human guise. His gaze burned through my very soul, a silent, damning question that indicted my entire existence, blaming my kind, my very blood, for this unforgivable tragedy. His furious voice ripped through the air, demanding a groveling apology from my lips, a surrender I could not even fathom. My spirit flared in fierce rebellion. I objected with every fiber of my being. I defiantly declared my undisputed humanity, my undeniable right to stand as one of them. Then the small boy, a whirlwind of pure, unadulterated grief, tearfully confronted me, his small voice breaking my heart with its anguish. He shrieked, a desperate, impossible plea for the return of his stolen family, his beloved mother, as if my hands held the power over life and death itself. His tiny face, a tragic masterpiece of fury and profound sorrow, was utterly contorted, hot tears streaming down his innocent cheeks in relentless torrents. His small, shaking finger pointed directly at me, his voice a piercing blade as he screamed the abhorrent accusation. I was the monster. The words struck me like a physical blow, leaving me deeply affected, my eyes wide with a horrific realization, my mouth agape in absolute crushing shock. A brutal, violent fist then slammed into my face, an unforgivable impact that drove me deeper into the cold, unforgiving ground where I already lay utterly broken. My head snapped back from the sheer, overwhelming force of that heavy, merciless blow, the world blurring into a painful chaos. Still consumed by a seething, uncontrollable rage, the man leaned over me, his voice a thunderous roar as he forcefully demanded that apology once more, a debt I could never repay. His face, a mask of grim, unyielding sternness, hovered above me, his relentless demands for an apology echoing like a death knell in my ears. I lay utterly defeated on the hard earth, my face etched with a profound sorrow, a crushing, overwhelming sense of failure, my eyes staring upward, wide with agonizing pain. My life, reduced to a relentless cycle of menial torment, found me endlessly mopping the vast, desolate floor of a cavernous, empty hall, my spirit slowly eroding with each useless swipe. This agonizing, tedious daily routine, a soul-crushing testament to my imprisonment, had been my brutal reality for over a solid decade, an eternity of servitude. My weary face, a canvas of unspoken pain, was perpetually cast downward, my mind shackled by the brutal understanding that I would not, escape this suffocating facility until I finally reached adulthood, a distant, mocking horizon. I often saw a figure, humble and reverent, kneeling before a monumental entity who stood with powerful, outstretched arms within the breathtaking expanse of the grand hall, an image of absolute devotion. Then, at the ripe age of 15, a beacon of impossible hope emerged. A divine knight's priest, a harbinger of destiny, presented a formidable selection test, a glorious, undeniable pathway to finally escape this living hell. My pulse pounded with raw anticipation. I declared to the echoing walls that only 5 agonizing days remained until the ultimate selection test, my moment of truth. My spirit roared a furious internal declaration. I would no longer tolerate this place, this prison that sought to break my very will. My very soul ached with a burning, unquenchable desire to shatter the chains of my current, desolate life, to finally break free. Then, with every fiber of my being, I asserted my unwavering, absolute resolve. I would leave this wretched facility, no matter the insurmountable cost. Even as my resolve solidified, another, a formidable figure I knew as the Spiky Blue Man, declared his own ultimate, unshakable ambition: to ascend as a divine knight, to grasp unparalleled power. Then, a voice boomed from unseen heights, a formal declaration that echoed through the hallowed space, announcing the absolute, awe-inspiring start of the knight selection ceremony itself. My gaze fell upon a truly majestic angelic statue, utterly bathed in ethereal, divine light, standing as a sentinel within the immense grandeur of the sacred cathedral. Within the towering, sacred walls of the cathedral, a resonant voice proclaimed the sacred decree. Only participants who had reached the age of 15 years could even dare to stand here. Another unseen speaker then issued a powerful summons, a rallying cry for those chosen few who wished to forge a knight's sacred vow, and in response, young men, all formidable candidates for knighthood, began their solemn, determined procession forward through the ancient, echoing pews of the cathedral. We, the male candidates, paused as one, our collective breaths held, awaiting the unequivocal command to step forward into our imminent destinies. But then, a scathing voice shattered the anticipation. A man stepped forth, confronting me directly, his venomous words piercing my ears as he branded me a monster, utterly unworthy of ever attaining knighthood. My spirit recoiled, and my expression became undeniably downcast, the familiar weight of their judgment pressing upon me once more. To officially initiate the ultimate knight selection test, an ornate, magnificent chalice, shimmering with a mystical, ethereal blue liquid, was ceremoniously presented before our eager eyes. As that majestic, ornate chalice was held aloft, gleaming like a beacon of destiny, an ancient elder issued the formidable instruction. We, the candidates, must step forward one by one and make our sacred, binding vow to its formidable power. The elder, a figure of immense gravity, then presided over the hallowed ritual, his hands solemnly cradling the intensely glowing chalice, a vessel of unimaginable power. He then meticulously explained the absolute, unbreakable rules for the chalice ritual. A devastating blue glow would signal utter failure, forever denying us the sacred path to knighthood. But a glorious, radiant golden glow promised the awakening of unparalleled knightly power upon drinking its mystical contents and sealing our eternal vow. The elder then issued the precise, sacred instructions on how each participant must make their monumental vow. His booming voice declared the ultimate sacrifice. We must offer God that which was most profoundly, unequivocally important to our very souls. My elder's booming voice hammered home the gravity of this moment. This ritual, this monumental ascent, was a singular, unrepeatable event in my entire existence. Then, a voice charged with an almost unbelievable intensity tore through the air, proclaiming a vow that resonated with absolute conviction. Two figures materialized, their eyes wide with a solemnity that spoke of the immense weight of their roles. The spiky-haired warrior, a beacon of sheer power, was reliving this very instant, a critical flashpoint in his own brutal legend. He unleashed a shout, a guttural roar of pure, untamed passion that threatened to shatter the very foundations of the facility. His vow, forged in the fires of agony, was absolute. Never again would he turn his back on a monster, never again would he flee from the monstrous threat. He was consumed by the crushing, agonizing memory of a monster, a horrifying beast, devouring his little sister, tearing her from his grasp in an instant of pure terror. A dark, searing flashback ripped through him, revealing his desperate, futile reach for his sister as a gargantuan serpent, a beast of unimaginable terror, loomed over her, its shadow swallowing her whole. In that infernal moment, his iron will solidified. No matter the danger, no matter the grotesque power of these abominations, he would utterly annihilate every single one of them. As his vow resonated, a soft, ethereal golden glow erupted from his form, accompanied by a subtle, almost hypnotic swirling sound that spoke of imminent cosmic upheaval. His eyes, wide with sheer, unadulterated surprise, shot upward as my elder's voice boomed, declaring that his noble, unwavering wish had pierced the heavens, reaching the very presence of God himself. My elder's next pronouncement was chilling, a solemn, ominous declaration. He could never, ever run again. His path was irrevocably set. Then, with an outstretched hand, my elder extended the very blessing of God, a gift of unimaginable power. He seized the ornate chalice, a vessel shimmering with ancient power, and drank deeply, eagerly, as a vibrant golden glow erupted around his entire being, signaling the beginning of his true ascension. Later, a staggering, explosive burst of divine activation manifested around the young woman, a raw display of overwhelming spiritual force. His own transformation, however, reached its absolute, cataclysmic climax. Its sheer power dramatically unfurled, a surging wave of energy that utterly consumed and overwhelmed every inch of the surroundings. He stood now, an unyielding monolith of power, radiating pure golden energy as his physique expanded, becoming robust, the very embodiment of unstoppable might. He stared at his own hands, now glowing with an ethereal, divine luminescence, his eyes filled with a potent mix of amazement and unyielding determination, his voice exclaiming in awe at this utterly amazing transformation. Then, with a fierce declaration, he proclaimed that an immense, untamed power was now overflowing from the very core of his being, a boundless reservoir of strength. I looked up, a profound, chilling concern gripping my very soul. The ceremony pressed onward, an unstoppable force, and now the brown-haired kid, with a tremor of anticipation, directed his own solemn vow toward the chalice, a sacred vessel of destiny. His vow, bold and heartbreaking, was to wander this perilous world without the tether of family once he departed from this facility's confines. He explained the heart-wrenching paradox of his vow. Leaving without family was necessary because every single person within these facility walls already was his family, a bond too vast to sever individually. The ritual intensified, and the brown-haired kid, a wide, excited grin plastered across his face, began to radiate with a vibrant golden light, his own power awakening. Then another voice, powerful and resonant, declared his vow, and a blinding golden light burst forth, enveloping his entire form in an aura of pure, unadulterated divine energy. Next, the young girl, her hand pressed over her mouth in a gesture of raw emotion, stepped forward and proclaimed her own deeply personal vow, a declaration from the depths of her soul. After the young woman's powerful declaration, a single bead of sweat trickled down my temple, a sudden, sharp reaction to the overwhelming weight of these monumental promises. With an unwavering conviction that shook the very air, I then declared my own unbreakable commitment. I would become a divine knight myself, a force of unparalleled righteousness. My hand closed around the cool, ancient surface of the ornate chalice, its power thrumming beneath my fingertips, just as my elder's commanding voice echoed through the chamber, directing my next action. My elder, a figure of imposing authority, extended his hand toward the magnificent chalice, formally inviting the next fortunate participant to step into their destiny. His voice, a thunderous command, ordered the next chosen soul to step forward, to claim their place in this sacred, life-altering ceremony. My fists clenched, raw power surging through my veins, as every eye in the room, filled with a mixture of anticipation and scrutiny, turned to observe my ascension. The ornate chalice, perched upon its dark, ancient pedestal, now pulsed with a terrifyingly powerful glow, an aura of surging, untamed energy swirling around it, ready to unleash its divine essence. This was it. I declared my own monumental vow. A joyful, almost savage smile split my face, my eyes burning with an unshakable determination as I unleashed my ambition. To become a knight, a protector of unmatched power, and to safeguard all that was precious. But as the echoes of my fierce declaration to protect faded, a sudden, unsettling confusion washed over me, a perplexing void in my otherwise ironclad resolve. Still, I pressed on, continuing my vow with the unwavering intent to protect all people, to stand as their ultimate shield. I paused, my mind racing, plummeting into a chasm of deep, agonizing thought. A profound, agonizing distress consumed me as I desperately, frantically struggled to conjure any more words, any further declarations worthy of this moment. My mind screaming in frustration, struggling for more words for my vow, I found myself questioning, in a moment of pure, devastating self-doubt, what else I could possibly offer to the gods, to the world. And as I stood there, utterly paralyzed, wrestling with the impossible task of completing my monumental vow, three imposing male figures, their presence radiating undeniable power, materialized before my very eyes, their arrival a sudden, shocking twist in my already tumultuous fate. My soul screamed for an escape, for a single sliver of true happiness to break through my desolate existence. Then, with a sudden, devastating clarity, a stark realization ripped through me. I declared, my voice raw with desperation, that I had absolutely nothing, that I had never possessed a single shred of true worth in my entire pitiful life. I pleaded, my very essence begging, that anything at all, would be an acceptable offering. My internal turmoil intensified, a furious, silent demand erupting within my mind. Just offer something, for the love of all that was powerful. Then, with a catastrophic tear, a mysterious, unknown object violently erupted from my very core, and I unleashed a primal scream of unimaginable agony. My entire being strained visibly, powerful internal forces continuing their relentless, overwhelming surge within my tormented frame. I hunched over in excruciating pain before the ancient ceremonial altar, my vision blurring as a grand blue chalice began to brim with a sinister, glowing purple liquid. As the vibrant, bubbling purple liquid dripped ominously from the now glowing chalice, I stared on, my eyes wide with unadulterated shock, my mouth agape in silent disbelief. The ornate chalice then vigorously, violently overflowed, spewing forth the thick, radiant purple liquid, a spectacle of terrifying power. I stood frozen in the vast church hall among the other rigid figures, stunned by the horrifying display. Around me, the observers began to murmur, a low, unsettling hum of fear and confusion. The elder, his ancient face etched with a grave, deeply troubled expression, observed the chalice, his unspoken thoughts screaming that he had never, in all his long years, witnessed such a profoundly disturbing color. Then, with a sudden, decisive motion, the elder raised his arm and loudly declared, his voice echoing with finality, that my ceremony was unequivocally over. He then issued a sharp, unyielding order for everyone to disperse, to abandon the hall and leave immediately. The elder, looking utterly distraught and covering his mouth in disbelief, tried to bring everything to a grinding halt, but I, with a sudden, desperate surge of will, commanded everyone to wait. I defiantly declared, my voice resonating with an undeniable, growing power, that my ceremony was absolutely not over yet. In that exact, catastrophic moment, I recoiled in pure, unadulterated terror as a devastating, powerful blast slammed directly into me. My arm, my very limb, was violently and brutally severed from my body in an instant of unbelievable horror. My lifeblood erupted, splattering profusely, sickeningly, everywhere, painting the sacred ground with my agonizing essence. I cried out a raw, animalistic sound of pure agony from my brutal, disfiguring injury, as two towering men loomed over me, their presence amplifying my shock and overwhelming distress. The elder, his gaze now fixed on my shocked, blood-splattered form, watched with chilling intensity while one of the men frantically called out for a priest, as if a mere blessing could fix this horror. The brown-haired figure, his eyes still locked onto the sacred chalice, seemed to confirm his earlier, terrifying thoughts, his expression grim. My own face, I knew, was a twisted mask of profound distress and consuming fear, a direct consequence of my catastrophic actions. Then the brown-haired kid, his youthful face contorted with revulsion, directly confronted me, his voice trembling as he spat the accusation. "You are a monster." My mind reeled, my voice barely a whisper as I desperately questioned what absolute hell was truly happening around me. A bald, menacing man, his eyes burning with lethal intent, then declared with chilling certainty that they would brutally kill me right there, in that sacred, shattered spot. An unseen voice, heavy with dark authority, then issued the brutal command, "Attack him." The bald guy surged forward, confronting me directly, his accusations venomous, screaming that I was a disguised monster, and viciously warning anyone foolish enough not to dare protect me. He stood, his stance radiating pure, destructive readiness, as a terrifying, palpable power visibly surged and crackled around his entire form. The elder, his voice laced with absolute desperation, cried out, pleading for the relentless fighting to cease immediately. He lamented, his voice heavy with despair, that such overwhelming, catastrophic power was never, ever meant to be wielded by mere humans. Then, with a deafening roar, an unstoppable, powerful force erupted, unleashing unimaginable, massive destruction, shattering massive stone fragments and blindingly lighting up the entire area. That annihilating, destructive force continued its unstoppable path, tearing through a colossal structure with terrifying ease. From a distance, I could only watch, paralyzed, as colossal debris rained down, a horrifying testament to the immense, cataclysmic destruction. Shattered, jagged debris from that devastating, powerful attack lay strewn across the ground, a grotesque landscape of ruin. Both the bald guy and I looked up in synchronized terror as even more monumental debris began to rain down around us. My mind screamed with worry, questioning what apocalyptic event was unfolding as a monstrous crack violently spread across the ceiling above. Then, from that horrifying crack in the concrete, a grotesque, menacing demon began its slow, terrifying emergence. Its abyssal mouth opened wide, a silent, terrifying chasm of pure malice. It extended a monstrous, razor-sharp clawed hand forward, a gesture of undeniable, impending doom. Its single, malevolent red eye fixed directly upon its chosen target, poised for the ultimate, devastating strike. The demon's colossal clawed hand extended, and the world around me exploded in a violent shower of debris. Around me, the collared man and countless other figures screamed, their terror echoing my own rising panic. Then, that red-eyed green monster, an abomination of pure destruction, brought its colossal foot down, violently crushing the very ground beneath my feet. The ancient stone structure erupted in destructive cracks, tearing apart under the overwhelming force of its impact. As this monstrous entity wrought its pure devastation, my elder stared in wide-eyed horror, his disbelief a raw wound against the impossible reality. The demon's gigantic, blood-stained hand loomed over everything, a terrifying shadow of ultimate doom. I saw the bald guy scatter desperately through the crumbling debris as someone's terrified scream confirmed the unspeakable truth. It was a demon. Its reign of pure annihilation continued, an unstoppable force ripping apart my world. Its green blood-drenched hands, dripping with the lifeblood of everything it had consumed, were a sickening close-up of my impending doom. With a horrifying swiftness, the demon's sharp, clawed hand reached for a helpless person, swallowing them whole into its abyssal maw. My elder, his voice strained with desperation, urged everyone to evacuate, to flee this inescapable horror. He urgently suggested calling the Divine Knights, a futile whisper against this overwhelming, absolute power. As the demon's relentless destruction continued, I was utterly shocked, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of this impossible nightmare. Then, in a horrific flash, my elder was violently struck by the demon's colossal force. His body was propelled backward, a broken puppet against an insurmountable titan. I wondered, for a fleeting, terrifying moment, if this truly was a demon, a creature of pure myth-made flesh. But the horrifying reality slammed into me. It was undeniably a monster, an entity of absolute terror. My eyes widened with pure, primal fear, my face slick with the cold sweat of my impending doom. Then, towering over my injured form on the ground, stood the bald man with his gauntlet, his stance aggressively demanding action. He commanded me to move, a desperate plea for me to fight against the inevitable. As the bald guy reflected on a past memory, an unseen voice resonated with chilling power, telling him his noble wish had reached the very heavens, a stark contrast to my present hell. But now, a colossal, monstrous demon screamed aggressively, its terrifying form looming over the bald guy, who could only look up in absolute, unadulterated terror. The demon extended its elongated, clawed hand downwards, an ultimate sentence, as the bald guy looked up, desperately pleading for a salvation that would never come. After the monster's devastating attack, I lay there, severely injured and drenched in my own blood, my wide, terrified eyes staring up in utter shock and profound despair. Then a kid, barely more than a child, rallied his determined companions, declaring we all had to fight. They radiated an immense power, declaring they received this destiny-driven power for precisely such a cataclysmic purpose. The demon, a true harbinger of doom, unleashed a powerful attack with its colossal palm, creating immense, earth-shattering shockwaves that tore through my very soul. I looked out, my eyes wide with pure panic, sweat pouring from my face, questioning what this overwhelming, world-ending power truly was. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I faced an unavoidable, ultimate death. Then the demon attacked, its brutal force piercing straight through the kid's body, a horrific display of its absolute dominance. He struggled intensely, desperately, against the monster's inescapable, crushing grip, a final act of futile defiance. After witnessing such overwhelming, unimaginable power, I questioned how I could possibly even scratch this monster, let alone confront its absolute might. The demon, a true apex predator of nightmares, was now devouring the corpse of the fallen, a grotesque feast of ultimate victory. Another character, his face etched with doubt, wondered if their supposedly divine power would even be effective against such a formidable, impossible foe. The demon screamed in pure, unadulterated fury, its impossibly long tongue now appearing directly above my head, a shadow of impending consumption. A sudden, desperate thought pierced through my terror-stricken mind, a final, flickering spark of defiance. I wondered, with chilling clarity, if this desolate, crumbling place was where my journey would ultimately end, where I would meet my absolute demise. My terrified eyes stared wide open, reflecting the impossible horror before me, unwilling to close against my ultimate fate. Injured, with my own blood staining my arm, my gaze fixed upon the glowing, ornate chalice, a beacon of desperate hope in this abyss of despair. The sacred chalice contained a pulsating, glowing liquid, an unknown, powerful essence. My face contorted, a mask of intense distress and absolute desperation, a testament to my burning will to survive. I firmly grasped the chalice, my hand shaking but resolute, declaring to myself that this desperate gamble was my only, absolute chance. It had to be fine. Holding that sacred relic, I urgently drank from it, the liquid burning down my throat as I declared, with every fiber of my being, that I would rather consume anything, risk anything, than accept death in this hellish, collapsing domain. Immediately, an overwhelming, raw surge of powerful energy began to radiate violently from my entire being, a new, absolute force awakening within me. My entire being was engulfed by a colossal, monstrous tongue, crushing me in its vile embrace. I felt the searing pain as my own blood, a crimson torrent, began to spill, splattering against the monstrous flesh that imprisoned me. Then, in a surge of inexplicable power, my previously severed arm, rematerialized, whole and terrifyingly complete. An utterly explosive, earth-shattering force erupted from the very ground beneath me, radiating an unstoppable wave of pure destruction around that heinous demon. My attack, born of sheer defiance, tore through its colossal tongue, severing that putrid thing with absolute precision. As I continued to unleash my devastating, world-shaking force, my very face was engulfed, consumed by an overwhelming, primal surge of power. My eyes, blazing with an unholy light, pulsed with the raw, untamed intensity of the internal power coursing through every fiber of my being. My entire body became a vessel for this surging, uncontrollable power, my hands instinctively reaching out as the sheer magnitude of it threatened to rip me apart, to consume my very essence. A dizzying disorientation slammed into me, leaving me adrift, questioning the fabric of reality and what in the blazing inferno had just transpired. I stood there, an unyielding titan amidst shattered glass, my eyes still burning with that same incandescent glow. Then, with a hesitant, almost reluctant shock, I began to process the impossible, the truly insane spectacle unfolding before my very eyes. Powerfully transformed, my body now a sculpted monument of raw muscle, I questioned the very reflection staring back, wondering if this formidable new form was truly me, or something far more ancient and terrifying. An utterly alien, almost chilling sensation resonated deep within this newly transformed, monstrous body. My words were a rasp, my entire body felt utterly, impossibly cold, as if infused with the void itself. This dramatic, cataclysmic change had unleashed within me an immense, devastating power, a force of pure unadulterated might. I felt an overflowing, limitless torrent of immense power, a tidal wave of destructive energy, surge from the deepest core of my being. Without warning, the demon, that infernal monstrosity, unleashed its own heinous attack, aiming to utterly annihilate me. I descended with blistering speed, a comet of vengeance, tearing through the air amidst crackling, explosive energy. The demon roared, an aggressive, ear-splitting bellow, its grotesque tongue lashing out as I plummeted, a guided missile of fury, straight towards its monstrous form. I then unleashed an absolutely devastating, powerful strike, a true hammer blow, from my mighty arm. My target was absolute, undeniable, the monster's abominable head. My attack was not just a strike, it was an implosion, a force designed to explode from within. And then a truly cataclysmic explosion ripped apart the very core of that monster, bursting outwards in a shower of gore and destruction. The impact was a seismic event, powerful and bone-jarring, scattering debris across the blasted landscape. I stood triumphant, a living vortex of swirling energy, after unleashing that world-shattering, powerful attack. But then my body, an unyielding vessel mere moments ago, began to contort, to struggle in profound distress, an agonizing spectacle witnessed by a mere brown-haired kid from a terrifying distance. I felt an irresistible, intense energy seize me, pulling my writhing form upwards, into the unknown. My face, twisted into a mask of pure agony. My teeth gritted against the overwhelming pain, as I fought against that consuming, annihilating power with every last ounce of my defiance. After a desperate, grueling struggle against that unfathomable power, my strength finally gave out, and I collapsed, utterly spent, to my knees. That brown-haired kid, a terrified spectator, watched the unseen, cataclysmic event with eyes wide in horror, sweat dripping down his face as he exclaimed in absolute disbelief and chilling dread. Then, the realization slammed into me. My previously severed arm, was completely, perfectly restored, leaving me to question the very fabric of reality, to wonder what impossible madness had just transpired. Purification. I looked up, my eyes wide, an exclamation of pure surprise escaping my lips. A massive, colossal sword, radiating an aura of divine judgment, descended with earth-shattering force. Its undeniable trajectory was clear, straight down towards that vile demon. A white-haired, bare-chested man sat on the ground, a mere mortal looking up in absolute awe as that powerful, reality-shattering sword impacted directly into the form of the green-blue phantom. The ornate sword, now firmly planted, stood upright, an undeniable beacon, radiating its immense, holy power across the devastated landscape. An unknown voice, a profound authority, explained the terrible truth. Leaving the demon's gigantic, grotesque corpse would unleash a devastating torrent of demon miasma, scattering it uncontrollably throughout the entire city. Then, a majestic woman in a flowing cape made her dramatic entrance, offering a casual, almost dismissive apology for her belated arrival. This same woman, now hovering commandingly above the massive sword, dared to question me, Leica, about who had truly defeated that monstrous abomination. A close-up, a powerful reveal, illuminated the woman in the cape, her figure framed by a brilliant, almost divine light emanating from behind her. My words were clear, resounding. It was the utterly overwhelming, the supremely powerful divine knights who had finally arrived, a force to be reckoned with. The magnificent woman in the cape, a true warrior titan, turned her gaze to me, her powerful smile acknowledging my very presence, declaring that I was quite something. There she stood, a monument of unyielding power, her grip firm upon a weapon of absolute legend. My gaze was locked on her as she defiantly stared skyward, her unwavering determination a tangible force, even as a colossal, radiant golden sword, a weapon of cosmic scale, began its cataclysmic descent. The sheer power radiating from that blade was enough to tear reality. Then, as the overwhelming energy dissipated around her, the woman in the crimson cape emerged, a figure of pure, undiluted triumph. Bathed in the lingering echoes of immense power, a slight, knowing smirk gracing her lips, proclaiming her absolute victory. I could practically feel her internal declaration, the profound weight of her own judgment, that vanquishing such an abyssal entity was nothing short of a legendary, earth-shattering achievement, a testament to her unrivaled might. She stood, a bastion of unwavering confidence, her very presence demanding reverence, and then the monumental truth crashed upon me. This awe-inspiring legend was none other than Divine Knights Commander Arthur herself. My entire world shifted. My mind reeled, utterly overwhelmed, as I frantically processed the sheer, monstrous scale of that magic sword, a weapon of impossible power, its existence utterly defying logic. I declared, my voice a mere whisper of astonishment, that never in my wildest, most fevered nightmares had I ever conceived of such an overwhelming spectacle, such an absolute display of cosmic dominion. In that cataclysmic moment, the true, terrifying essence of a knight's formidable power, a force that could reshape reality itself, slammed into my consciousness with the force of a collapsing star. Then, a blue ponytail warrior, clearly an elite in his own right, dared to project his voice, calling out to the legendary Commander Arthur. With a movement of terrifying grace, Arthur, a true goddess of the battlefield, subtly turned her head, her gaze a piercing arrow of awareness. Her voice, dripping with an almost arrogant confidence, then sliced through the air as she utterly dismissed the entire group, declaring their efforts pathetically too slow. The sheer audacity, the raw power in her words, was intoxicating. My own expression, a window to my churning thoughts, immediately deepened into a fervent, almost desperate contemplation. I found myself wondering, with an almost religious awe, if this unparalleled individual was truly the supreme commander of the legendary Divine Knights, the absolute pinnacle of their terrifying might. My ambition, a raging inferno within my soul, swelled to monumental proportions as I dared to imagine the world-shattering implications if this titan of power, this living legend, were to ever truly acknowledge me. In that earth-shaking instant, a profound, undeniable truth ripped through my mind. With her acknowledgement, I could finally break free from the shackles of the orphanage, catapulting myself into a destiny of my own making. Nearby, a woman adorned with shimmering gold trim reacted, her expression twisting into one of utter, profound surprise, clearly mirroring my own internal chaos. Driven by an uncontrollable, primal urgency, I surged forward, closing the distance to Arthur, my words erupting as I feverishly began to speak of the glorious Divine Knights, my entire being pulsating with desperate hope. Arthur, an enigma of power, responded to my raw enthusiasm with a subtle, yet piercing, questioning sound, her eyes seeking the depths of my intent. Suddenly, a red-marked blue man, driven by some unknown, insane impulse, charged like a mad dog, only to be met by an invisible, pulverizing impact that sent him screaming in agonizing pain. The air itself seemed to recoil from the sheer force. With every fiber of my being, I poured out my soul to Arthur, declaring my unwavering, lifelong devotion to becoming a knight, confessing my profound admiration for their legendary might. And then, my voice raw with desperate hope, I begged her, pleaded with her to allow me to join their ranks. But in that critical, soul-bearing moment, an infuriating brown-haired kid, a mere speck of an interruption, viciously cut off my monumental declaration to Arthur. My gaze, a burning crucible of unbreakable will, solidified my absolute, unyielding resolve to seize my destiny and become a knight, no matter the cost. The vile brown-haired kid then shrieked, his voice dripping with venom, actually urging Arthur, the legendary commander, to kill me, audaciously labeling me as a monster. The sheer audacity was a slap across my face. An audible, collective gasp of utter shock ripped through the stunned onlookers, reverberating with their disbelief at such an outrageous, baseless accusation. Arthur, with an intimidating calm that chilled me to the bone, asserted that speaking in such a manner to a friend was utterly perilous. Yet, the relentless brown-haired kid, a pest of unimaginable proportions, persisted, jabbing his finger at me, maliciously identifying me as the solitary, haunted survivor of an obliterated village, a fact Arthur herself seemed to be intensely reflecting upon, her gaze unnervingly deep. Arthur, a storm of controlled power, and the blue-haired man, a pillar of his own formidable strength, locked into an incredibly intense, almost psychic gaze, a silent battle of wills playing out before my eyes. The insufferable brown-haired kid, his mind clearly unable to grasp the magnitude of the moment, then vocalized his profound surprise that such a monumental transformation could possibly occur without the sacred ritual of a vow being made. Now utterly transformed, my hair cascading in long, dark waves around me, I spoke, my voice resonating with an unfamiliar, profound strength of the overwhelming, exhilarating power that coursed through my very veins, a power that was now irrevocably mine. The obnoxious brown-haired kid, his eyes bulging with an almost comedic disbelief, then shrieked his outrageous contention that I, Leica, was no longer even human. I was struck absolutely speechless, my mind utterly incapable of forming a single coherent thought in the face of such monstrous accusations. My inner monologue screamed with absolute shock and utter disbelief, vehemently asserting that what I had just witnessed, this monstrous display of power and accusation, was profoundly, utterly wrong, an affront to everything I knew. Then, with a mere, almost casual flick of Arthur's impeccably gloved hand, the brown-haired kid, who had just been so brazen, suddenly registered an expression of monumental, bone-chilling surprise. In the very next breath, Arthur, with a terrifying, effortless exertion of her colossal power, casually flicked the brown-haired kid, sending him hurtling through the air like a discarded rag doll, a breathtaking display of overwhelming force. Arthur's voice, a steel-edged blade, then cut through the silence, as she pointedly interrogated the now-flung brown-haired kid, demanding to know if she had, in fact, saved his miserable existence. Arthur stood absolutely still, her expression now a mask of chilling, unyielding seriousness, her very presence an undeniable declaration of her supreme authority. Her words were delivered with the finality of a death knell as she declared, in no uncertain terms, that she would tolerate absolutely none of that particular, infuriating brand of disrespectful discourse. The pathetic brown-haired kid, now utterly humbled and utterly broken, instinctively clutched his hand to his face, his bleeding nose a stark testament to Arthur's casual power, his distress palpable. His pleas were gut-wrenching, pathetic cries for help desperate, groveling appeals for forgiveness erupting from his shattered form, a truly humiliating defeat. My own expression, a reflection of my inner turmoil, was one of unadulterated, monumental shock, my entire worldview irrevocably altered by Arthur's display of absolute dominance. I stood there, utterly bereft of words, my mind struggling to process the implications of an unseen event, a silent, seismic shift that had just occurred. Then, as if commanding the very air around her, Arthur, the epitome of authority, began to speak once more, her voice resonating with purpose. She spoke with an imperious tone, clearly indicating her desire to sweep aside the previous, inconvenient topic, a move I welcomed with desperate hope. Her piercing gaze then landed squarely on me, locking me in place as she, the commander of legends, directly questioned my earlier, monumental claim of not having made a vow. The weight of her inquiry was immense. I immediately, frantically explained, my words tumbling out in a torrent of urgent justification, that I had been on the very precipice of uttering my sacred vow when that monstrous demon had inexplicably burst forth from the abyss, unleashing its terrifying chaos upon us. Then, in a critical, urgent pronouncement, Arthur herself, with the gravity of an ancient oracle, revealed the truth of my terrifying power. I had gained my incomprehensible ability to fight by consuming the hallowed, sacred contents of the legendary chalice itself. The implications were earth-shattering. I concluded with absolute certainty that this overwhelming power must be that of a knight, a formidable force even without a sacred vow. "You should never obtain a knight's power," my mother Arthur declared, her voice a chilling pronouncement that struck me with agonizing distress. "Was an offering made?" she pressed, her gaze piercing through me. "With whom did you make a vow?" My eyes widened in utter surprise, a sudden, blinding realization crashing over me. I struggled, my throat constricted, unable to form a coherent response. My words were hesitant, fractured, as if my very being resisted the truth she sought. My mother looked at me with a dismissive expression, a clear sign of her profound disdain. "You have piqued my interest," she then stated, her tone shifting to a predatory curiosity. "Now, what is this power you wield?" She challenged me, demanding a demonstration of my capabilities. "It would be faster if I saw it with my own eyes," she explained, her voice edged with an impatient command. I reacted with complete bewilderment to her audacious challenge, my mind reeling in urgent panic. How could I perform such an action? My power had transformed itself, an uncontrolled surge, not a conscious choice. She listened with an exasperated sigh, her patience clearly wearing thin. My mother looked down, her expression one of determined impatience. "We need to move quickly," she commanded, her words cutting through the air. Suddenly, she grabbed me, her grip like an iron vice, lifting me effortlessly as I reacted with a jolt of pure surprise. With a terrifying surge, my mother launched me into the brilliant blue sky. I screamed, my voice raw with shock and confusion as I plummeted, sternly calling out to her receding figure. What in the blazing world was happening? "Show me your power," my mother demanded, her voice echoing from below. She warned me with a terrifying finality. I would fall, and I would not be saved. The blue-haired man below, witnessing my horrifying ascent, angrily branded her a demon. My mother, from her distant vantage point, also noted how incredibly bright it was up here. I rapidly fell through the air, screaming in unadulterated distress. My mind raced, questioning my mother's monstrous actions. A sickening realization slammed into me. I would absolutely die if this fall continued. With a surge of primal resolve, I decided to use a transformation, any transformation, to save myself from this imminent, bone-shattering doom. My deepest fear was being slammed against the unyielding ground and utterly annihilated. Then, an impossible vision materialized from the clouds, a colossal whale with majestic wings. The sky-eater bird, an apex predator of this terrifying domain, flew through the sky. I expressed profound alarm, identifying it immediately as a deadly sky-eater bird, a creature in its natural lethal habitat. I fell, directly into the path of the attacking sky-eater bird. The blue-haired man below watched in horror, urgently warning me that this was no time to be calm, that I would not survive if I allowed myself to be eaten. The enormous sky-eater bird hovered ominously, letting out a sickening gulping sound that resonated with pure dread. The blue-haired man leaped forward from the platform, declaring that he would go help me. "Wait," my mother commanded, her voice sharp. With a cunning smile, she viewed this unexpected, brutal situation as a perfect chance to witness the blue-haired man's true power. He grimaced, once again branding her a demon. The sky-eater bird flew in the distant background, its enormous form a looming shadow. As the blue-haired man flew forward, sounds of horrific exertion came from the sky-eater bird's monstrous stomach. I was utterly shocked, realizing with a horrifying jolt that I was now inside a living monster's belly. Skeletal remains floated in the corrosive pink liquid, my predicament undeniably lethal. I knew with absolute certainty that I would truly be stuck, devoured, if I remained in this monster's stomach. A monstrous maw, dripping with acidic saliva, loomed menacingly above me, ready to seal my fate. Within this fleshy hell, various tentacle-like organs writhed and growled, their movements an abomination. This caused me immense distress and absolute terror. I had always thought the orphanage and the divine nights were the absolute worst fates imaginable, but I declared, with a primal scream of defiance, that dying here was an even worse, more humiliating end. I screamed in agony as my body erupted, transforming with a raw, uncontrollable power. I unleashed a powerful, devastating blast from my fist, a desperate, overwhelming surge against my impossible prison. I continued to unleash my immense power, a raw, terrifying force that pulsed from my very core. I groaned, the sheer effort of maintaining such an overwhelming, reality-shattering attack tearing through my muscles. My immense power coalesced into a vast, swirling vortex, a maelstrom of destruction that twisted the very air. It expanded outwards, a catastrophic explosion of unparalleled might, enveloping the entire scene in my absolute domain. Above me, on a precarious platform, the blue-haired man and Arthur stood, their eyes undoubtedly fixed on the spectacle of my overwhelming might. I knew the blue-haired man had questioned Arthur's audacious recklessness, but her hunger to comprehend my power was a voracious beast she could not tame. Arthur, in her calculating mind, silently grappled with the terrifying question. What immense power was truly needed to defeat an unclassified demon, alone? She contemplated the benefit of such raw, untamed force, wondering if it truly served their grand designs. Then, with a devastating final surge, the Sky-Eater bird's monstrous stomach exploded in a cascade of raw energy and viscera. I burst through its ruined core, emerging from the heart of its obliterated form, my body a missile of pure momentum. I plummeted rapidly, violently, through the now clear sky, a meteor of vengeance. The blue-haired man and Arthur remained rooted to their platform, their gazes now fixed directly upwards, tracking my descent. I was falling towards their very location, propelled through the air, my form still engulfed in brilliant, scorching light and streaking, untamed energy. They observed me, those two powerful figures. I crashed down, a shattered remnant of my former fury, lying injured on the debris-strewn ground near a ruined skeletal structure. The blue-haired man, his prior composure shattered, urgently rushed towards me, his voice laced with uncharacteristic panic as he demanded to know my condition. I could only manage a guttural groan, slowly, painfully, regaining my fractured consciousness. He looked down at me, his immense power, his very presence, radiating a palpable relief as he assessed my shattered form, confirming, to his utter shock, that I seemed miraculously unharmed. Arthur, always the strategist, continued to observe me, her mind already dissecting my overwhelming power, the terrifying capability to defeat such a monstrous entity by myself. She acknowledged my sky-high combat prowess, judging me, with an almost grudging respect, to be at least at the devastating level of a vice commander. A flicker of memory, or perhaps a tale I was later told, flashed through my mind. The blue-haired man, 15 years prior, kneeling amidst desolate ruins, tenderly cradling a tiny, helpless baby me. His words, etched into history, spoke of how I was the only child he had ever refused to discard, a truly monumental claim. Arthur's voice cut through the air, her sharp observation stating how much I had grown, evolving into this utterly impressive, terrifying sight before her. Then she unleashed his true name. Kiran. The blue-haired man, my rescuer, my reluctant guardian, was revealed as Kiran, the 9th branch commander of the Divine Knights, a titan of their order. Kiran, the mighty commander, stated with a heavy, somber conviction that he remained profoundly unsure about my very existence. He continued his dark reflection, the chilling words echoing in my mind. He truly believed it might have been better for me to have simply perished back then, in those desolate ruins. Arthur, ever in command, then called out to a brown-haired kid, a mere youth, who stood startled before a colossal stone building. The kid reacted with a sound of extreme, undeniable shock, his fear almost palpable. Arthur declared her terrifying edict. They would take me in, harness my overwhelming power. She stated with cold, hard logic the absolute importance of keeping this unknown, untamed power, my power, under their relentless, scrutinizing watch. Arthur continued her chilling monologue, even as the brown-haired kid displayed his raw, unadulterated fear and distress at her words. Arthur explained their horrifying truth. They could not afford to be particular about who they chose to help, regardless of identity or the monstrous power they wielded. Amidst the terrifying sound of cracking glass against a bright, burning sky, she declared humanity's collective, desperate state. Humanity, she stated, had only a tragically little time left, a finite span until its inevitable doom. Then, the entire devastating scene shattered, exploding into bright, glowing fragments against a void-like dark background, leaving only the echoes of their harrowing proclamations. The vibrant blue sky was my first sensation, a breathtaking canvas where majestic white Pegasi, creatures of pure myth, pulled flying carriages through an ethereal aerial setting. Distant birds were mere specks against this impossible grandeur. Within that very carriage, my form lay in a deceptive slumber, bathed in a soft, almost angelic light. My eyes, heavy with the weight of oblivion, slowly fluttered open as Arthur's voice, a sudden tremor in my peaceful void, pierced through, asking if my awakening had finally arrived. A shockwave of sheer surprise ripped through me, an involuntary exclamation bursting from my very core. My immediate, almost instinctual response was a swift apology, a reflex born from years of subjugation. Confusion, a thick fog, clouded my mind as I desperately scanned my surroundings, demanding to know my location, while Arthur and Kiran remained enigmatically silent, their presence a weighty mystery. The magnificent flying carriage, a marvel of impossible engineering, relentlessly cleaved its path through the boundless blue, its journey guided by the unseen hand of its driver. I hauled my body upright, my gaze immediately drawn to the majestic spectacle beyond the window. my surprise a palpable force. Arthur, ever the master of command, explained their critical departure on an uncompromising schedule, apologizing for my missed goodbyes, a truth that struck me with surprising weight. My eyes, those windows to my soul, dilated to an impossible degree, mirroring the raw surge of surprise and the chilling dread that snaked its way into my very core. A sharp flinch, a sudden blush, betrayed my inner turmoil, but hope, a desperate, brilliant flame, ignited within me as I dared to ask the monumental question. Was I, Leica, now officially bound to the legendary Night Order? Arthur's confirmation, a decree of immense power, resonated through me. Yes, I was officially part of the Night Order. The declaration was a thunderclap, shaking the very foundations of my previous existence. She continued, her voice holding the absolute weight of destiny, informing me that from this pivotal moment, my very being was under the Night Order's unwavering, ironclad care. With a confident, almost regal gesture, her open hand seemed to radiate a warm glow, a powerful visual emphasis on my unequivocal welcome into their formidable ranks, a claim on my future. My mind, always calculating, always seeking the deeper truth, pondered her words, demanding to know the true, profound implications of being under their care. Her grip on my hand was firm, an unyielding steel, as she issued her formidable warning. My very existence, so utterly unusual, meant my trustworthiness would be brutally forged and determined solely by my actions. My expression, I knew, was a mask of utter confusion. I consumed her warning, letting its profound weight settle, and then made my swift, definitive judgment. It was an acceptable burden, a small price to pay for my liberation, for the absolute freedom of leaving that wretched facility behind forever. I fired off the urgent question, demanding to know the fate of that cursed facility. Kieran, ever the bringer of stark truths, revealed its utter devastation, proclaiming its imminent dismantling. He continued, dropping another bombshell. The staff and the remaining children from that shattered prison would be brutally separated, dispersed to unknown, distant locations. Arthur's voice, now a mournful echo, delivered the crushing news. Most of the children, those who had just forged their sacred covenants, had tragically perished. It was a wave of pure devastation. My gaze, heavy with a somber weight, fixed on nothing, profoundly affected by the tragic fate of those lost souls. My voiced sympathy was inadequate for such an immense sorrow. Arthur's next question, delivered with a piercing intensity, demanded to know if there was anyone at all, I wished to bid a final farewell. My eyes, those silent witnesses to my suffering, widened with an overwhelming sadness as I delved into the profound depths of her inquiry. As I grappled with that monumental question, my head snapped upward, profound distress contorting my features as a memory. A vision of myself clutching a broken, empty vessel flashed with agonizing clarity before my inner eye. The flashback, a cruel echo of my past self trapped within that monstrous facility, culminated in the bitter, simple truth escaping my lips. I had no one to say goodbye to. Driven by an urgent, desperate need to escape the crushing weight of memory, I demanded to know our destination, my voice cutting through the silence. Arthur's revelation was immediate and powerful. We were soaring towards their formidable headquarters, nestled within the sacred, awe-inspiring holy capital of Alha. Her finger, a beacon of destiny, indicated the distant horizon where the majestic, impossibly grand castle of the capital was beginning to materialize, a colossal promise on the edge of the world. She explained that this colossal bastion housed countless knights, including fresh cadets like my own insignificant self, all sworn to its defense. Then, her voice dropped, revealing a truth that sent shivers down my spine. A calamity, a cataclysm from the terrifying mythic age itself, could erupt, without warning, at any heart-stopping moment. My mind reeled, a torrent of questions demanding answers about this unfathomable calamity from a forgotten, mythic era. Arthur, with a commanding gesture, then directed my gaze towards something unseen, something vital. She pointed, her finger an extension of her will, as my eyes, still impossibly wide with raw anticipation, riveted onto a nearby reflective surface, a mirror to untold mysteries. My eyes, instruments of my awakening, dilated with an intensity that threatened to shatter, reflecting a scene of blinding, utterly unknown brilliance, a premonition of pure, unadulterated power. And then, with a deafening, reality-bending crack, the very sky above us, that vast, beautiful expanse, shattered like fragile glass, revealing the impossible truth beyond. The ancient text of that devastating tome screamed a horrifying truth, detailing how a colossal rift had once ripped open the very fabric of our great sky, unleashing a torrent of demonic essence and monstrous beasts from an unimaginable otherworld. It was the Demon King himself, a tyrannical overlord, the abhorrent sovereign of that vile otherworld, a covetous god whose ambition knew no bounds. From his abyssal will, the Demon King spawned his heinous avatars, the dreaded celestial demons, their terrifying silhouettes swarming like a plague across the ominous purple, star-scarred background of that catastrophic vision. This monstrous entity further defiled all life, twisting and corrupting existence itself, polluting our sacred lands with an unimaginable ocean of his vile, demonic essence. But then, the legendary Night Order, heroes of old, arose to defy the very heavens. They drove the Demon King back into his cursed rift, sealing his infernal celestial demons across every tormented corner of the continent. This horrific saga, this epic struggle, was the very reason humanity's habitable lands had tragically shrunk to their current meager size, a devastating testament to that ancient war. Arthur, her voice laden with grave importance, explained that the ultimate destination of that terrifying crack remained an absolute mystery. But then, her gaze sharpened, emphasizing the truly chilling truth. That apocalyptic fissure was undeniably, inexorably, slowly growing larger. Their unwavering conviction was that only the colossal might of the Night Order could possibly stand as a bulwark against this encroaching, ever-expanding sky anomaly, a cosmic wound threatening to tear us all asunder. My eyes must have been as wide as saucers, my mind utterly stunned by the enormity of it all. But then, she turned to me, and I felt a heat surge through my face, blushing as I stammered. "You truly have such incredibly high hopes for me, Arthur?" She leaned in, her gaze intense, her voice a low, commanding whisper, confirming she held boundless expectations for my raw, untamed power. Her touch was featherlight as she gently caressed my chin, declaring that she felt an astonishing, potent energy radiating directly from my core. I gasped her name, Arthur. The sound ripped from my throat in absolute, bewildered surprise. Her piercing gaze bore into my very soul as she explained that the luminous light blazing within my eyes was the undeniable, telltale herald of my true transformation, the explosive unleashing of my latent power. Her grip on my hand was firm, unwavering, as she recounted the impossible feats. My flame sword's explosive fire attacks, the miraculous, complete regeneration of my left arm after it had been savagely severed. She declared with an unshakable conviction that she had never, in her vast experience, encountered a power that so utterly captivated and piqued her overwhelming interest. A deep, resonant thumping echoed, almost like a primordial heartbeat, as a solitary drop of sweat, luminous and incandescent, detached itself and plummeted, highlighting my very essence in that charged moment. Arthur extended a single, deliberate finger, her voice dropping to a serious tone, admitting she still did not grasp the full magnitude of what I had surrendered, what I had offered up to forge this absolute covenant. That luminous drop landed with an almost ethereal grace upon her fingertip, a physical manifestation of my powerful essence. She then continued her profound statement about that power, the power swirling within my very being. Then, her voice commanding, she instructed me to wield my phenomenal power, to fight alongside the formidable Night Order, for the salvation of all humanity, for the very sake of our people. A confident smirk played upon her lips, a predatory gleam in her eyes, as she subtly, almost imperceptibly, tasted that precious sweat drop from her fingertips, a direct acknowledgement of my surging energy. With a thunderous, unyielding conviction that resonated through my entire being, I enthusiastically agreed to unleash my power, to dedicate every fiber of my existence to this monumental task. Arthur responded with a rare, soft smile, a fleeting moment of calm before the storm. And just like that, without a moment's hesitation, she thrust me headfirst into an immediate, critical mission. One moment I was with her, the next I was inexplicably propelled downwards, plummeting through the boundless sky, my mind reeling in utter confusion. I was violently hurled from the very carriage, a guttural scream of absolute shock and profound disorientation ripping from my throat as I descended into the unknown abyss below. I impacted the unforgiving ground of a dense forest with what should have been a devastating, bone-shattering force. But then, a colossal surprise surged through me, a sudden, astonishing realization bloomed in my mind. I felt absolutely no pain whatsoever. I rose to my feet, my form impossibly tall, my very body emitting a faint, ethereal glow. I was utterly shocked by this profoundly strange, alien feeling emanating from my new vessel. It was as if my body, this phenomenal new shell, was no longer entirely my own, yet it pulsed with an unimaginable, raw power. Arthur's words echoed in my mind, a sudden, blinding clarity. Those who forge a covenant, those chosen few like me, are blessed with two distinct, earth-shattering kinds of power. She had explained that special, utterly devastating abilities, like her own legendary sword and my very transformation, were known as divine arts, manifestations of raw, celestial might. And the explanation continued, detailing the overwhelming physical capabilities that now far surpassed any ordinary person's wildest dreams, an invincible defense and immense strength, which she had named protection. I was now a living weapon, a walking fortress, ready to obliterate any obstacle. Commander Arthur, with his imposing presence, laid out the true, terrifying scope of the Night Order's work, revealing it extended far beyond merely dispatching fiends and monsters. My very first assignment, a direct order from the commander, was to eliminate the trash. He then commanded me to proceed to the city after this initial cleansing, his voice a stern warning against any misstep in direction. A knot formed in my stomach as I grappled with the grim implication of cleaning up trash. My eyes widened, a shockwave of realization crashing through me. Further within the oppressive silence of the forest, 3 shadowy figures emerged, their hushed whispers confirming the terrifying departure of the Night Order's majestic sky carriage. They seemed to have barely escaped its crushing power. The forest, a deceptive veil of serenity, continued its eerie, watchful silence. Suddenly, a burly man with a prominent brown fur beard twitched, his eyes narrowing with a suspicious glare as he questioned my unexpected presence, demanding to know who I was. He pressed on, his voice a growl, claiming they had detected a significant disturbance moments before my arrival. The brown fur-bearded brute and his menacing companions closed in, their hulking forms creating an overwhelming wall of aggression against me in the deepening shadows of the forest. His booming voice then challenged me, accusing me of causing the ruckus, and I opened my mouth to respond, a new understanding dawning. I was momentarily startled, a flicker of bewilderment crossing my features at the sheer audacity of their confrontation. Who in the blazing inferno were these monstrous men? One of them, a man with stark white hair and a bare, weathered chest, peered at me with a calculating gaze, wondering if I was merely an abandoned child left to rot in this dangerous wilderness. Another, his face shadowed by a gray stubble, added to the grim speculation, proposing I was an orphan whose parents had been cruelly slaughtered by merciless fiends. My face twisted into a furious grimace when the gray-stubbled man's disgusting internal monologue resonated through the air. My origins meant nothing to them as long as I could be sold. The audacity, a profound, primal sense of impending doom screamed through my veins, confirming the overwhelming threat emanating from these loathsome men. The urgent truth clawed its way into my mind with horrifying clarity. These weren't just men, they were vicious, predatory bandits. I stood my ground, my posture hardening, ready to unleash my full, devastating power against these aggressive, encroaching villains. A chilling thought echoed in my mind. Was this the trash Commander Arthur spoke of? Did cleaning up trash mean absolute elimination? My wide blue eyes flashed with pure, unadulterated alarm as their aggressive questioning intensified, a predatory gleam in their own gazes. Then, a scene of unspeakable horror unfurled. These monsters stood menacingly over 3 bound, terrified children, their threats dripping with venom as they commanded me to come quietly, painting a vile picture of my fate if I dared resist their monstrous intent to sell me. The leading bandit's voice, a gravelly snarl, ordered me to approach, calmly and without incident. But I am Laika, and I do not obey scum. My voice, now a booming declaration of righteous fury, cut through the air, demanding their immediate, unconditional release of the helpless children. The bandit's smug expression instantly shattered, replaced by a look of utter, dumbfounded surprise at my sudden defiant stand. He sputtered, a bewildered query escaping his lips. What in the depths of hell is happening here? This was it, my official baptism by fire, my very first mission as a full-fledged, terrifying member of the Night Order, bestowed directly by the commander. And with an overwhelming surge of absolute confidence, I knew I would not just take care of this bandit, I would utterly obliterate him and his pathetic crew, swiftly and decisively, in my absolute domain. My turn was a lightning reflex, revealing 4 hulking bandits emerging from the oppressive gloom of the forest. Their meager minds, no doubt, instantly questioned my sudden presence, probably wondering if I was some scout for the famed Night Order. As their monstrous forms became clear, my face hardened into an iron mask of pure, unyielding resolve. They lumbered forward, their vile faces contorted into menacing snarls, believing they could intimidate me. I merely scoffed, a dismissive sound, at their pathetic attempts at a formidable presence. One of them dared to roar, claiming this cursed ground was their domain, daring to state my identity was irrelevant. Their unwavering resolve, a joke in my eyes, screamed that my presence, regardless of who I was, would not change their monstrous territorial claim. Then came the inevitable, a collective, guttural yell. Get him! My body blurred, an impossible blur, as I effortlessly dodged their clumsy, desperate blows. I simply vanished from my previous location, a ghost of motion. Suddenly, their pathetic swords and that crude axe lay scattered, utterly useless, on the forest floor. Their dim minds struggled, questioning if I had truly vanished. My next move was a brutal, swift strike, unleashing an impossible action that shattered their composure into absolute shock. I declared, with absolute certainty, that the immediate peril was now, finally, under my control. Their faces contorted in a grotesque display of sheer alarm and utter surprise. I defensively squatted, my form an impenetrable shield, protecting the 3 bound and terrified children as I commanded everyone, with chilling authority, to stay back, to give me space. My eyes ignited with an infernal, crimson glow of pure determination, and a crushing, overwhelming presence erupted from my very core, chilling the bandits to their bones, filling them with absolute apprehension. One of their pathetic voices croaked, questioning this sudden, impossible surge of power, while another's face twisted into an ugly mask of impotent annoyance. Then one, a fool, rapidly drew his crossbow, screaming a desperate order to take his shot, as if that flimsy weapon could touch me. And in an instant, I vanished again, a terrifying echo of my speed. Their bewildered cries followed. Where did he go? I reappeared, a sudden, devastating presence, directly in front of their wretched faces. My body coiled into a low, predatory stance, ready to unleash absolute devastation. A frantic scream from one of them. He's over here. The crossbow-wielding fool aimed, knocking a projectile with a pathetic attempt at precision, targeting me with his desperate, final shot. He shrieked, a dying man's cry for me to die. The projectile, a blur of futile metal, descended upon me. My hand thrust forward with overwhelming force, unleashing a colossal wave of raw, destructive power. I stood at the epicenter, an unmoving core amidst an explosive, surging wave of power that erupted with a deafening, sharp impact. Intense energy, a shimmering, distorting force, ripped through the very air, obscuring the entire chaotic scene. For a fleeting moment, my strained face, etched with the effort of wielding such immense power, was barely visible through the raging storm. The bandits, witnessing this impossible might, were utterly stunned, their eyes wide with disbelief and absolute surprise. The colossal power finally dissipated, leaving sizzling, ethereal trails of light in its wake, marking my passage. My own hand, the source of that devastating energy, was now starkly visible, still shimmering with residual power. My foot landed with a deafening, forceful impact, echoing like a thunderclap through the ruined silence. I stood tall, radiating an overwhelming, palpable power, declaring with a voice of absolute finality that I would end this now. My eye glowed with an intensified, piercing light, a blazing streak of raw, unyielding determination. I stated, with chilling certainty, that I would end their pathetic existence swiftly, brutally. Their terrified whimpers confirmed their understanding. He's a monster. Then I unleashed my true, devastating attack, blasting those pathetic bandits through the very air, utterly annihilating their resistance, defeating them completely. My face, a mask of intense focus, was then seen in devastating detail, my eyes radiating an impossible, raw power. I was enveloped in a blindingly bright, ethereal aura, a crushing manifestation of my absolute power, emanating with a deep, earth-shattering rumble. My very form was engulfed in pure, raging energy, an inferno of my might. The very ground beneath my feet seemed to boil and crack, responding to the overwhelming, radiating force of my existence. Then, an insidious, chilling feeling permeated my senses. Something was gravely wrong. My eyes sharpened to razor points, my expression turning utterly stern as a desperate bandit's voice shrieked, commanding me not to move. He stood there, a truly pathetic display of desperation, holding one of the children hostage, pressing a vile weapon against the child's innocent throat, glaring at me with a fierce, hollow defiance. That pathetic bandit, thinking he held any sway, clutched the child, his voice a desperate croak warning me not to approach, threatening to unleash his meager fury. His face contorted, a sweaty mask of fear and desperation, betraying his utter weakness. He pressed a pathetic, sharp blade against the innocent child's throat, a futile attempt to intimidate my overwhelming presence. My senses, honed to absolute perfection, immediately registered the other, unseen bandit, another shadow of his impending doom. From a distance, 2 more small figures watched, paralyzed by their own terror. Then, with a sickening swiftness, his blade moved, a shallow slash, drawing a single line of blood across the child's neck. A pained gasp tore through the air, and my absolute patience shattered. I understand. I stated, my voice a calm, chilling prelude to the hurricane I was about to unleash. I declared I would not come any closer, a promise that held a far more brutal meaning. My demand was not a request. It was an absolute decree. Release the captive children. He maintained his pathetic defiance, his blade still a threat against the child's fragile neck, arrogantly declaring there was no chance of releasing such a valuable possession. Then, with an audacious stupidity that sealed his fate, he demanded to know my name. As I stood, a silent, imposing force, he rambled on, explaining how demons had already claimed the children's families. His vile explanation continued, claiming these children would have died and become monster food anyway, so they were merely making good use of them. He elaborated further, describing the horrific fate awaiting them, destined for the depraved whims of rich old men, beginning to detail the unspeakable degradation. My response was instant, overwhelming, and utterly decisive. A blinding slash tore through his arms, a deluge of his dark, pathetic blood splattering the ground as shock and agonizing pain seized his entire being. Without a moment's hesitation, my blade descended again, severing his head with brutal finality. His dark blood exploded onto the earth, a grotesque masterpiece of my decisive power, splattering the ground. The bandit crumpled, a headless husk, his pathetic existence erased from my absolute domain. It was then that I truly grasped the terrifying scope of my own abilities. My power was not merely the sword, but an unleashed force capable of such absolute devastation. I mused on these newly discovered, devastating capabilities, acknowledging their undeniable usefulness in my journey of ultimate dominance. I turned to the child, who stared at me with wide, startled eyes, and asked if he was okay, my voice attempting a gentle tone after such a brutal display. Suddenly, a surge of overwhelming energy manifested around me with a powerful whooshing sound, an uncontrolled display of my raw might. In that moment, I understood the sheer terror my presence instilled in others. The child, utterly overwhelmed, cried out in a raw, piercing wail, tears streaming down his face. My hand moved, a rare, gentle touch upon the child's head, hoping to offer a sliver of comfort. Was it scary? I asked softly, understanding the terrifying magnitude of what they had just witnessed. I then enveloped the small child in my embrace, a stark contrast to the violence I had just unleashed. Suddenly, a startling sensation made me look up, the child clinging tightly to my back. From above, two small figures looked down, tentatively calling out my name. Then, without warning, my overwhelming power failed me, and I lay motionless on the unforgiving ground. An eternity of nothingness passed in a mere breath. My consciousness drifted, and when it finally threatened to return, a new scene, a new struggle, was already unfolding around my dormant form. Kieran, a formidable presence, stood majestically, his gaze fixed on a distant horizon. He turned his head, his mouth slightly agape, announcing with a powerful voice that someone had arrived. A startled, distressed expression then crossed his powerful features. Still in that state of agitation, Kieran called out to a figure beyond a grand archway, demanding he wait. My hazy vision registered a light brown sleeveless man and a brown bob woman, struggling to carry a limp, white-haired man into a paved courtyard. Then, with immense struggle, those same small children reluctantly carried me, my form utterly unconscious, into that very same space. Kieran's powerful voice demanded to know what catastrophic event had transpired. He looked down at my unconscious form, a deep concern etched into his powerful face. A sudden, thunderous realization then dawned upon him. The child, with a brave voice, explained the situation to Kieran, detailing my final instructions to lead them here. Kieran, with overwhelming gratitude, thanked them. The child continued, revealing that I had simply fallen asleep, after carrying them with my last ounce of power all the way to this monumental city. With a powerful movement, Kieran hoisted my unconscious body over his shoulder, a look of incredulity on his face. He declared, with a booming voice, that it was utterly unheard of for someone to cause so much trouble for the very people he had saved. My legend, even in unconsciousness, was already growing. I was enveloped in a profound sleep, completely oblivious as Kieran, with his petty authority, stamped a demerit against my record. High above, a grand castle, a monument of power with countless spires, stood silhouetted against a sunset that bled across the sky, a spectacle befitting the monumental forces I had just unleashed. Even in my profound rest, the whispers began, an unknown voice, sharp with acknowledgement of the situation I had created, questioned their next move. My second branch chief, Fran, a woman of formidable presence, actually gazed up at my resting form, a loving smile gracing her lips. She, in her baffling perception, found my dormant face utterly adorable, her ridiculous declaration of a perfect mark echoing through the silent halls. But Kenneth, the second branch deputy chief, a man of lesser vision, scoffed, his judgment warped. He called his own chief a softy, his insult echoing my way as he slapped me with a failing mark. Daring to claim my dormant state made me look like an idiot. Then Grift, the fourth branch chief, a master of petty judgment, adjusted his spectacles, his gaze a stern, displeased condemnation. He spewed his preposterous claim, asserting it was beneath me to exhaust my overwhelming strength on what he called a mere cleanup. Jack, the sixth branch deputy chief, a man whose judgment I barely considered, offered a thoughtful smile, his perception warped, finding me disappointing. He had heard tales of my monstrous capabilities, tales that painted me as an assassin, and yet his narrow mind saw only disappointment. But even in his warped disappointment, he could not deny the undeniable pull, the urge to witness my next brutal move, to see what raw power I would unleash. High above these petty squabbles, Arthur, a true power, sat regally on her golden throne, a vision of absolute command. Her voice, a commanding presence, cut through the noise. She, with her superior insight, suggested their evaluations of me, a rookie who had just crushed my first mission, were far too harsh. With a chilling smirk, Arthur decreed that my observation would continue, her eyes fixed on something beyond, agreeing that more growth was indeed required for future, even more spectacular assessment. The next morning, my new domain, the Night Order headquarters, stood majestic under a perfectly clear sky. Inside, a grand table assaulted my senses, absolutely laden with an outrageous spread of fresh, vibrant fruits. Meticulously prepared dishes, an impossible bounty, also overwhelmed every inch of that majestic surface. I saw a steaming bowl of soup, a perfectly roasted salmon fillet, masterpieces of culinary genius. My eyes were wide with utterly disbelieving wonder, fixed on this colossal dining table overflowing with gourmet food. My gaze was a raw, primal stare, my mouth openly drooling. I was utterly, irrevocably overwhelmed by the sheer, magnificent scale of this feast. I hunched over the table, my hands gesticulating wildly, the earth-shattering realization slamming into me. This entire, impossible feast was for me. An extreme, volcanic joy erupted within me, an uncontainable eagerness to absolutely annihilate this entire feast. I began to eat frantically, relentlessly, as if the very air would snatch it away. A maid, a silent, graceful presence, offered me a glass of water, and I reacted with a startled jolt, my rapid consumption momentarily halted. She held out a crystal-clear glass, offering me even more, a gesture of almost unbelievable kindness. She smiled, a gentle, understanding smile, now holding a tray with not one, but two glasses. My ravenous hunger resurfaced, and I continued my rapid, relentless assault on the food, my eagerness an undeniable force. I looked up, startled, a pang of something akin to guilt hitting me as I surveyed the lavish table. I mumbled an apology, the maid standing patiently nearby after serving me. Her voice was a soothing balm, assuring me to eat at my own pace, that no one, absolutely no one, would dare to take my food. A shy, genuine smile spread across my face, my cheeks flushing with a rush of acceptance and overwhelming gratitude. I gave an affirmative, guttural reply, a promise to myself. The maid served me a refreshing drink, encouraging me to indulge as I and these few, silent guests enjoyed this grand feast. My mind raced, a profound, unshakable realization. I could finally eat. In absolute peace. The thought solidified into an unyielding conviction. No one would dare to bother me here. A stark, brutal memory flashed through my mind, a broken, filthy bowl, crammed with the most undesirable, repulsive garbage. A fierce, unyielding resolve hardened within my very soul. I would never be beaten. I would never be forced to eat garbage again. Not ever. Building on those searing thoughts, an immense, overflowing joy and an unbelievable wave of relief washed over me. My gratitude was an unstoppable force. I was monumentally glad, profoundly grateful, that I had come to this sanctuary, the Night Order. A deep, abiding contentment settled within me, reflected in my satisfied smile, as I contemplated my new, glorious life at the Night Order. And as if the universe itself was blessing me, I had even received a magnificent new uniform. A close-up would have revealed my mouth, still devouring, still reflecting that profound, undeniable contentment. Then a voice, sharp and commanding, shattered my blissful reverie. He asked if I were Ryuka. A figure, radiating an undeniable aura of authority, strode directly toward me. It was Kenneth. He stared, an intense, piercing gaze that startled me, dragging a surprised gasp from my lips. I felt a shock, a profound confusion at this sudden, aggressive intrusion. From behind him, I could sense his silent, merciless judgment. He probably thought I looked like an absolute idiot, My eyes snapped wide, instantly ignited with a scorching, uncontrollable fury, my tongue flicking out in a primal, aggressive gesture. I unleashed an angry exclamation, a raw challenge. Kenneth, utterly unmoved, ordered me to follow him, declaring, with chilling certainty, that he would discover if I was merely useless or truly helpful. Confusion warred with my escalating anger as I demanded, with a voice full of defiant challenge, to know exactly who this insolent man was. He then, with an infuriating calmness, introduced himself as Kenneth. With his hands casually, almost dismissively, in his pockets, he formally announced himself as the vice commander of the Night Order's second branch. 3 maids, silent spectators, were visible in the opulent grand hall. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer gravity of Kenneth's formidable role as vice commander. Kenneth, already moving, simply ordered me to follow, as if I were a mere subordinate. Then, with a sudden, startling command, he also ordered the visibly flustered maid, Fran, to follow. He then, with an almost sneering casualness, asked her how long she intended to remain in her current disguise. Fran looked utterly flustered, her composure completely shattered, as Kenneth coolly informed her it was time to depart, addressing her, to my absolute shock, as Branch Commander Fran. My own shock reached stratospheric levels as Branch Commander Fran called out, demanding I wait, declaring she needed to put away her plate. Kenneth, with his usual frantic urgency, bellowed that it was time to depart, attempting to push my legendary pace. The colossal Night Order headquarters, a fortress of absolute power, loomed under an impossibly clear sky. My mind reeled, utterly stunned by the revelation of a branch commander, a title that already screamed immense authority. Fran, with her unnerving calm, ambled beside me as we navigated a deceptively rustic path, each step a prelude to something monumental. My companion Fran radiated pure, blissful contentment, a sight that only intensified the gnawing disquiet in my very soul. I was worried, and rightly so. As Fran confidently strode ahead, I shot a dark, piercing glance over my shoulder, my expression etched with the gravest seriousness. My instincts were screaming. Then, an unexpected jolt sent me into a sudden blur of motion, a visceral reaction as a burst of pure surprise ripped from my throat. Fran, with her infuriatingly unwavering confidence, simply commanded me not to worry, as if my apprehension was an insignificant trifle. She stated we had an overwhelming torrent of tasks ahead, but our ultimate, sacred objective was the safe return of every single soul. Then, with an intensity that pierced through me, she demanded to know if I truly comprehended the absolute gravity of that goal. I affirmed my perfect understanding to Fran, who, in her typical fashion, simply offered a serene smile by my side, seemingly impervious to all chaos. My mind raged at the unbelievable dichotomy. How could someone so utterly unassuming, so deceptively calm, possess such monumental, undeniable importance? Kenneth, ever the rigid informant, declared we were nearing our ultimate destination, a pronouncement Fran met with a simple, knowing acknowledgement. Fran then dramatically addressed both me and Kenneth, striking a playful, almost theatrical pose with a brilliant star seemingly crowning her head, while Kenneth just stood there, observing her peculiar power with his usual stoicism. She revealed that a monstrous, terrifying presence had been reported on the very outskirts of the royal capital that morning, a declaration that sent a shiver of anticipated conflict down my spine. Kenneth then clarified that the minor damage, a ridiculous understatement, necessitated an immediate, crushing response, which directly led to his deployment and, crucially, the deployment of the branch commander, an overwhelming force. Fran then turned her formidable gaze upon me, explaining that they would now ruthlessly evaluate my absolute abilities, a stark reminder that I was now utterly bound within the iron grasp of the Night Order's protection. Her gaze drifted skyward, a thoughtful intensity etched upon her face, as she continued to unveil the crushing truth. The other branch commanders, titans of power, had been vehemently debating my very fate. As I listened with a focused, almost predatory intensity, the brutal, undeniable truth crashed over me. This entire operation was a treacherous, merciless evaluation of my worth. My face, a mask of stunned realization, contorted as the full, shocking weight of this immediate evaluation slammed into my consciousness. I unleashed a guttural cry of utter disbelief, my jaw dropping open in a display of pure, unadulterated shock. This was beyond comprehension. The terrifying specter of losing this precious, newfound life flashed before my eyes, and I desperately roared, both internally and externally, that I absolutely, unequivocally would not lose it. Fran, with a perplexing gentleness, reached out and lightly patted my head, a bizarrely comforting gesture amidst my spiraling panic. She then looked at me, her eyes alight, declaring she held immense, soaring hopes for my incredible potential. Fran stated with absolute certainty that she had personally heard tales of my overwhelming skills, relayed directly for the branch commander himself. A surge of pure, unadulterated triumph filled me, and I declared with a confident smirk that if that was the extent of the challenge, it would be laughably, ridiculously easy. I then demanded to know if these so-called opponents, for my glorious evaluation, were truly the monstrous, terrifying creatures I was born to annihilate. With a roar of pure, unstoppable confidence, I declared that I could and would utterly wipe out any and all opponents in mere moments, an unstoppable force of destruction. Kenneth, with his typical infuriating sarcasm, sneered that those were indeed bold words, coming from someone who had to be pathetically hauled home by the very child I had heroically rescued. My blood instantly boiled, and I questioned, with a furious snarl, precisely how he, the self-important imbecile, knew such intimate, humiliating details. Kenneth, his expression now utterly grave, delivered a crushing pronouncement. If he, or worse, the branch commander, deemed me utterly useless, my tenure within the formidable Night Order would be brutally, immediately terminated. He continued his merciless admonishment, his judgmental gaze boring down on me, daring to remark upon what he insolently called my idiotic face. I erupted, confronting Kenneth with a furious demand to know his entire, infuriating deal, and precisely why he perpetually swaggered with such sickening, undeserved superiority. Kenneth, with a truly baffling air of disbelief, then had the audacity to ask if I was genuinely posing such an utterly obvious question. Fran, with her usual impeccable timing, smoothly stepped between my surging rage and Kenneth's smug arrogance, declaring with absolute authority that there would be no fighting. Not yet, at least. She then, surprisingly, offered a genuine apology to me. She went on to explain, with a sigh, that Kenneth's brutal honesty was an inescapable consequence of his sacred covenant, a fact he seemed to acknowledge with an impassive, almost vacant stare. Fran, unbelievably, then asked if I, the legendary Laika, could possibly find it within my magnificent being to forgive Kenneth for his relentless insolence. My powerful mind instantly latched onto that single, potent word: covenant. Confusion and intense thought warred across my features as I tried to decipher its profound meaning. My fleeting confusion instantly shattered into absolute clarity. I grasped the brutal reality of the covenant. I immediately spun back to Kenneth, confronting him with a thunderous demand to know if he, in his pathetic arrogance, genuinely believed I possessed an idiotic face. What would I do about it? My blood absolute boiled at Kenneth's dismissive question. I could feel Fran frantically trying to douse the inferno Kenneth was stoking. He had definitely heard me. He pressed further, his gaze burning through my very soul, asking if I had made a covenant. My entire being reeled, a surge of pure surprise crashing through me. What if I haven't? I demanded, my voice sharp as a blade. Kenneth, with a chilling calm, explained that a covenant was the very heart, the ultimate price offered for true power. He elaborated, a grim pronouncement, that greater sacrifice unequivocally led to greater power. My determined eyes, however, already screamed that I understood this brutal truth. Then a cold, metallic touch kissed the back of my head. A pistol, held by Kenneth, was aimed directly at me. He began to unravel the savage realities lurking within the Night Order, painting a grim tapestry of destruction. He thought that a third of all new recruits were annihilated within 6 months, either ripped apart by monstrous beasts or utterly broken by their crushing covenants. My head snapped up, a profound shock, a horrifying realization seizing my very core. This was it, the true, savage nature of this place. A sudden, urgent thought flashed through my mind, wondering exactly when this pivotal event had unfolded. Kenneth's deep contemplation mirrored my own, a silent acknowledgement of the sheer brutality surrounding us. He then fixed his gaze upon me, asking if I truly intended to step into this absolute domain of chaos. He explained, without the fierce resolve to sacrifice anything, I would crumble. His hand tightened on the gun, the very air vibrating with his unspoken challenge. Fran, her voice laced with pure desperation, screamed for Kenneth to stop. Yet I merely stated, with a terrifying calm, that it was true. Kenneth grunted, a questioning sound escaping his lips. I confirmed it. I had not yet fulfilled this critical requirement. I had not yet properly forged my covenant. My hand shot out, gripping Kenneth's weapon, and I declared with absolute conviction that the commander had taken me in. I now had glorious food and a soft bed, a sanctuary I had clawed my way into. I had escaped a facility of pure hell, a nightmare I would never return to. I gripped Kenneth's weapon even tighter, my voice rising to a passionate roar. I did not care about covenants, or any of that ridiculous nonsense. I would do whatever it took to join the Night Order. I would cling to this place with every fiber of my being, with everything I possessed, and no one would ever take it from me. My eyes, ablaze with an otherworldly light, glowed with my absolute declaration. Kenneth's eyes widened, a sudden realization washing over his face as something profound had happened to his divine arts tool. He grunted, a sound of pure astonishment at what I had just wrought. Furious, Kenneth lunged forward, his weapon raised, prepared to unleash his attack. Fran, her voice a desperate plea, urged them to stop. Both Kenneth and I looked up, surprised, as Fran stood between us. She smiled, a playful wink, and pointed her finger, addressing both of us. Fran conveyed her overwhelming encouragement, her fierce enthusiasm for our raw energy and undeniable motivation. She declared, with absolute certainty, that things would change from this very moment. Fran, Kenneth, and I stood in the dark forest, illuminated by our own glowing auras, our gazes intently fixed downwards. Numerous glowing red eyes pierced through the oppressive density of the forest. Eerie, guttural sounds echoed from the hidden swarm of unseen creatures. Kenneth and I reacted with an intense shock, a primal alarm at the terrifying, unseen threat. Large, red-eyed ape shadows began to emerge from the crushing darkness. Fran, her voice a rallying cry, encouraged us to channel our overwhelming energy into our work, into the inevitable battle. Fran, her voice a rallying cry, encouraged us to channel our overwhelming energy into our work, into the inevitable battle. I was already channeling my absolute power, preparing for the devastating impact of the looming battle alongside Fran and Kenneth. Even the formidable purple sash man, a warrior of immense presence, cast his gaze upwards, drawn by the sharp, undeniable hum of our surging power. Then, the monster monkey struck. Its attack ripped through the very fabric of the air, a swift, terrifying whisper of impending doom. I gasped, the cold grip of surprise tightening its hold as I barely evaded that destructive blow. My life flashed before my eyes in that split second. The grotesque beast, satisfied with its failed attempt at my annihilation, hunkered low, its malicious attack concluded. My eyes, wide with sheer disbelief, betrayed the profound shock that reverberated through my core from such a ridiculously narrow escape. And then, the horrifying truth revealed itself. That vile purple substance, which I had only briefly glimpsed, began to devour a tree stump before my very eyes. It melted, dissolving into a sickening, thick liquid, exhaling plumes of insidious white vapor. The sight was absolutely chilling. My blood ran cold. Fran, Kenneth, and I reacted with a unified surge of dread to the monster's corrosive tail. My mind reeled from the sight of the melting tree, while Fran's urgent warning sliced through the air. That tail delivers fast, deadly poison. My gaze shot upwards, surprise morphing into desperate alarm as a legion of apes, a suffocating wave of pure aggression, descended upon me from every conceivable direction. One of those monstrous apes, its poisonous tail a blur of lethal speed, suddenly whipped out and connected, making me bellow in raw alarm. I grimaced, a guttural sound escaping my lips, as the ape's colossal tail pressed dangerously close, its vile power almost crushing me. My face contorted with a tempest of frustration and burning anger at the tail's insidious attack. I roared, declaring this ambush, this cowardly tactic of the tail, to be nothing short of cheating. Just then, the purple accent man, a whirlwind of spiky blue hair and devastating speed, ripped through the air with a brutal kick, targeting a massive pink obstacle. Fran, with her usual serene power, smiled gently, radiating an almost unsettling cheerful confidence amidst this chaos. She then waved goodbye, a warm smile gracing her lips, her staff held poised as she declared she would leave the rest to me, even as I grappled with an enraged ape in the harrowing distance. My face contorted in a mask of extreme shock and profound distress, an uncontrolled exclamation of surprise tearing from my throat. Fran then loudly declared the overwhelming truth. Too many monsters are around. She asserted with absolute conviction that a true fiend, a master of unspeakable evil, must be commanding this monstrous horde. With a terrifying resolve, Fran then announced her decision to scout ahead a bit. Before I could even process it, she charged boldly into the dense forest, her staff a lethal extension of her will, moving with ridiculous speed towards even more apes. "Wait!" I screamed, an urgent plea ripped from my lungs, but it was too late. Kenneth, meanwhile, had transformed. Her focus was absolute, her entire being a coiled spring of destructive energy. She was now dual-wielding 2 handguns, unleashing a torrent of rapid, deafening fire. She then aimed one of her devastating handguns forward, clearly preparing for a shot of truly monumental power. Even the formidable purple pants man cried out in surprise at the display. Kenneth unleashed an aggressive, explosive volley forward. I flinched back, my hands reflexively flying to cover my face, overwhelmed by the sheer, sudden violence of the assault. The shock was immense. I clutched. Behind me, an ape, its monstrous head gushing blood, collapsed from a precision projectile hit. The beast lay utterly lifeless on the desolate ground. A rapidly expanding pool of crimson enveloped its pathetic form. Kenneth held her handgun aloft, a wisp of smoke delicately rising from its barrel, a chilling testament to her brutal efficiency. I stood off balance, my gaze fixed on the fallen ape, its red scarf fluttering eerily, an overwhelming surprise still dominating my expression. The very ground beneath us, now desolate and scarred, bore witness to the cataclysmic aftermath of our intense, unforgiving confrontation. Only the lengthening shadows, like silent judges, remained. Then, her voice cutting through the tension, Kenneth warned me. "If you think joining the Night Order is easy, just observe." Her next words were a hammer blow. I was just in the way. I stared up at her, utterly shocked, barely able to react, a choked exclamation of surprise tearing from my chest. A furious surge of power erupted within me. I channeled immense, raw energy into my hand, preparing for a strike of absolute devastation. With a defiant roar, I unleashed a powerful, earth-shattering strike that sent another ape reeling, and through the dust I commanded Kenneth, "Listen to me." The slicked collar man, a force of nature, then unleashed an overwhelming, devastating attack of his own. He demonstrated an immense, undeniable power and an unyielding dominance that commanded respect. I lunged forward then, my own determination a blazing inferno, my action powerful and absolute. My fierce determination solidified as I declared my absolute resolve. "I have to join the Night Order." But Kenneth, with a chilling dismissiveness, merely retorted, "Words are cheap." Kenneth kept demanding that I prove the absolute, undeniable seriousness of my intentions, as if my very presence wasn't enough. Then, with a predator's fury, Kenneth lunged, his pistol a deadly extension of his will. I was already locked in, thrust into the raw, visceral crucible of intense forest combat. He advanced, every step a deliberate, calculated declaration of war, his pistol extended, a harbinger of the chaos he intended to unleash. My magnificent blade screamed as it met the enraged ape's aerial assault, a thunderous clash that tore through the very fabric of the forest air. Kenneth then unleashed a torrent of pure destruction from his pistol, shredding the beast with a brutal efficiency that left it severely wounded. I answered with a devastating, wide-arc blast of energy from my sword, a wave of pure force exploding outward toward another monstrous ape. With a determined scowl etched onto my face, I brought my blade down in a powerful, earth-shattering slash, my power ready to explode from above. The very air rippled as I unleashed a truly powerful slash, a searing streak of lethal energy that carved a path of undeniable dominance across the battlefield. Finally, I stood, a weary but undeniable victor, in the hallowed silence of the forest clearing, my sword still humming with residual power. Meanwhile, Kenneth was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, engaging multiple enraged apes as they swarmed him from every conceivable angle. He plunged fearlessly downward, a human missile of destruction, into a howling horde, the strained, furious sounds of their grasping efforts completely futile against his might. I let out a guttural exclamation of pure frustration as two more aggressive, monstrous ape-like creatures lunged at me from the oppressive density of the forest. This entire situation was maddening, but even I, in my supreme fury, had to acknowledge the unwavering authority of the vice commander. I considered my dire current predicament, a stark realization dawning that my blade's kill rate, for all its power, simply could not match the sheer, devastating efficiency of Kenneth's gun. I stood utterly poised, my focus absolute, as yet another grotesque ape launched itself directly into my path. Everything moved with a relentless, aggressive momentum, an unstoppable force pushing us to our absolute limits. A thunderous shout erupted from my very core, echoing through the trees. My internal thoughts spiraled, piling concern upon concern, a relentless onslaught against my strategic mind. I continued my calculations, the cold, hard truth hitting me that expanding my flames, making them even more devastating, would only accelerate my inevitable burnout. A vivid flashback seared into my mind. The worried faces of the children looking down at my unconscious form, sprawled helplessly on the unforgiving ground. My mind screamed the undeniable truth. At this insane pace, I would swiftly burn out, my power consumed. Kenneth, with an infuriating smirk, dared to question if that was truly the absolute extent of my formidable power. He then barked orders, telling me not to zone out even for a second while resting, condescendingly instructing me to at least find some meager shade. My face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated anger and searing frustration. I raged internally at Kenneth's seemingly unending stamina, the terrifying chasm separating our abilities suddenly feeling vast and impossible. I immediately confronted Kenneth, demanding to know the secret behind his seemingly limitless supply of ammunition. He coldly explained that his divine art tool wasn't just a gun. It was a mana-devouring monstrosity, generating bullets from pure, raw spiritual energy. I instantly observed that Kenneth, for all his brutal intensity, possessed an inherent inability to lie. Kenneth, for his part, merely looked incredibly annoyed by my astute observation. It was then, in a flash of sudden clarity, that I realized Kenneth's divine arts operated on a fundamentally different, almost alien, principle than my own. My mind raced, recalling diagrams that detailed energy projection, showcasing both the precise impact of discrete shots and the overwhelming power of continuous energy flows. I reflected on this profound knowledge, a gnawing truth asserting itself. Even with all this understanding, I could not simply manifest a gun into existence. My power worked differently. Then, with an unstoppable surge of power, my gloved hands began to glow, radiating an internal light that promised imminent, overwhelming force. I considered the brutal reality. If this current, unsustainable situation persisted, the outcome would be devastatingly obvious. Suddenly, a concentrated, blinding beam of pure light erupted from me, tearing upwards, dramatically illuminating the oppressive darkness and scattering a storm of particles around my absolute domain. I stood there, utterly enveloped in an intense, pulsating aura, radiating an undeniable, raw power that would shake the very foundations of this world. A decisive, earth-shattering thought crystallized in my mind, outlining my undeniable path forward. Kenneth, ever the warrior, aimed his pistol forward, a menacing shadow against the encroaching forest. His face was a mask of unwavering intent, every muscle taut, every nerve prepared. He dared to wonder, with a truly insulting arrogance, if I, Leica, was finally giving up. He spat out that he simply could not adjust his rigid strategy, nor could he conceive of a new, more effective plan. Then, with a crushing finality, Kenneth declared that I, in my current form, simply did not belong here, in this proving ground of ultimate power. He finished his damning pronouncement by stating he would report every single detail to the fearsome branch commander upon her return. Kenneth was already laser-focused, his gaze burning with raw determination. His eyes then shot skyward, an unyielding resolve hardening his features. Suddenly, a catastrophic explosion of pure, unadulterated power erupted from the very earth beneath us. Kenneth stood amidst the smoking ruins, a titan forged from the destruction. His stunned gaze then locked onto me, Leica, as I was entirely consumed by a towering pillar of savage energy. He stared, his face a masterpiece of shock and gnawing concern. A ragged gasp tore from his throat. I don't operate on petty parlor tricks. I had just made the ultimate decision, abandoning all pretense of efficiency, scoffing at mana cost. My absolute power was now unleashed, every ounce of my being roaring its challenge. I was going all out, no holds barred. The monstrous apes around us reacted with utterly terrifying, open-mouthed shock and primal fear to the sheer, earth-shattering magnitude of my power release. Kenneth, for his part, let out a sharp, decisive sound as he launched himself like a projectile through the turbulent air. My own face was a mask of intense, almost maniacal focus, my eyes wide and my mouth open in a silent scream of power, radiating an aura that signaled the immediate, devastating launch of my ultimate attack. With a powerful, earth-rending yell, I unleashed a massive, destructive energy blast. This cataclysmic blast rapidly expanded, its violent force immediately ripping through the ranks, forcing multiple apes to recoil in sheer terror. The energy blast then intensified to an impossible degree, erupting into a powerful, outward-emanating explosion of pure, unbridled destructive force. My powerful energy blast violently shattered the very ground beneath their feet. The monstrous ape was violently thrown backward, consumed amidst the flying debris of its own demise. A faint, eerie glow and shimmering particles now drifted in the dark, apocalyptic aftermath of my dominance. In the wake of my overwhelming blast, Kenneth descended from the turbulent, smoke-choked sky. He plummeted toward the scarred earth, carving a path through the scattering debris. Kenneth landed, exclaiming with a wild look that my power display was absolutely reckless. His impact alone created a deep, gaping crater, sending displaced earth and lingering dust clouds swirling into the air. He swiftly raced across the barren, blasted terrain, letting out a sharp, decisive sound as his gaze flickered back to me. I lay utterly sprawled, completely spent, my body screaming from the exertion. I was utterly, irrevocably exhausted, confessing that I could not even twitch a single finger. Despite my fatigue, I quietly reflected on the chaotic, utterly decimated scene I had just created. Still sprawled on the ground, I boastfully asked Kenneth, who was now approaching me, if he had truly witnessed the absolute spectacle of my actions. I proudly declared that I had just annihilated more enemies than he had in a single, magnificent blast. The ground remained sickeningly littered with countless monster pieces as I continued to aggressively demand my rightful recognition. Kenneth, however, looked utterly puzzled, his brow furrowed as he asked what could possibly be wrong. His eyes then snapped with sudden, chilling concern as his gaze darted off-panel, a silent, desperate question forming in his mind. What in the world was happening? From the scattered, shredded corpses, subtle, ominous lines of raw energy and debris now began to ominously emanate. These sinister, thread-like strands of energy then rapidly sank into the very ground, a hidden, terrifying process beginning its insidious work. A single, sickly glowing thread violently twitched its way up from the earth. Kenneth let out a guttural scream of pure shock, roaring that this situation was beyond bad. It was an undeniable, deadly trap. His voice tore through the air, shouting for us to run, to escape this impending doom. But it was too late. Kenneth and I were violently, instantaneously thrown into the churning air amidst a shower of lethal debris as a powerful, devastating explosion erupted directly from below us. Kenneth's face contorted in a mask of extreme distress and sheer, petrified shock as he was overwhelmed by this sudden, unexpected, catastrophic force. We both plummeted rapidly, helplessly, towards a colossal, fanged maw that had just burst from the ground, letting out simultaneous exclamations of utter surprise and disbelief. My stomach dropped with sickening speed, Kenneth and I plummeting through the abyssal gloom, the very air screaming past my ears. I realized, with a shock that hit me like a physical blow, we were not just falling. We were being swallowed, consumed whole by an unspeakable maw. My teeth ground together, a furious symphony of determination as our horrifying descent accelerated, dragging us deeper into the creature's terrible abyss. I unleashed my power, a furious surge of raw energy exploding from my hands, tearing at the colossal beast's inner flesh. Suddenly, Kenneth's iron grip hauled me upwards with a violent jerk, ripping me away from the overwhelming, destructive surge that erupted from the monster's depths. What in the blazes is this thing? I roared, my voice barely audible over the roaring chaos. Kenneth, ever the walking encyclopedia of absolute nightmares, shouted back that it was a demon, a vile entity that had masterfully orchestrated our doom by luring us with lesser beasts. My blood ran cold, then boiled with rage. The demon's mouth yawned open even wider, a chasm of absolute terror, revealing rows upon rows of teeth, each one a dagger of pure malice, waiting to shred us into oblivion. Thank you for that absolutely groundbreaking revelation, Kenneth. I seethed, my sarcasm dripping like venom, each word laced with the unbearable weight of our desperate situation. My face was slick with sweat, every inch of my body screaming in protest, the raw, brutal injuries a testament to the immense power I had already unleashed. My reserves were completely tapped. I had nothing left to give in this suicidal fight. A colossal, grotesque tongue lashed out, coiling around Kenneth and me with sickening speed, its suffocating grip tightening like a death sentence. We thrashed, fought, and clawed with every ounce of our remaining strength, but its hold was absolute. A searing pain shot through me, twisting my features into a furious grimace. "Release me, you abhorrent abomination!" I screamed, my voice raw with defiance as I writhed and struggled against the crushing, inescapable pressure, desperate to shatter its suffocating embrace. Then, a blinding light pierced the gloom above us, and Kenneth and I gazed upward in unadulterated terror as a luminous figure hurtled downward, a celestial projectile descending at impossible speeds from the now terrifyingly bright sky. Fran, a whirlwind of furious power, plunged from the heavens, closing the distance between us and our demonic captor. Such an improper situation, she mused, her voice chillingly calm, observing the demon's obscenely gaping maw as she neared. She descended like a god of war, her massive, spoon-like weapon glinting with menacing intent. "This truly is an improper situation," she remarked again, her tone laden with a dangerous sarcasm that promised immediate, brutal retribution. Then, with a devastating blur of motion, Fran brought her colossal, spoon-like weapon down, a furious, crushing blow aimed at the heart of our monstrous prison. In the next instant, with an unbelievable surge of raw power, she launched a spherical object upwards, a projectile of pure, unadulterated force. The sheer, cataclysmic force propelled it through the air, tearing through the demon's internal anatomy, sending a massive spray of gore and debris hurtling skyward. She stood, a figure of absolute dominance, in a newly formed, smoking crater, bathed in an ethereal pink light, radiating an aura of overwhelming victory. High above us, a grotesque, multi-limbed form, unmistakably a part of the demon, tumbled from the sky, a broken toy launched to unimaginable heights by her incomprehensible power. Her weapon, a harbinger of absolute destruction, now plummeted back towards the ground, a lethal comet seeking its final resting place. With an earth-shattering crash, her weapon slammed a colossal, mangled section of the demon's body deep into the ground, causing an impact wave that ripped through us both. Kenneth and I roared in pain, the residual force shaking our very bones. "You both put up an admirable fight against those monkeys," Friend stated, her voice calm, even as Kenneth and I still reeled from the sheer force of her attack, completely bewildered. Then, with a slight dip of her head, she offered her apologies, a bizarre understatement after the cataclysm she had just unleashed. She clarified, explaining that she had sensed the demon's malevolent presence, an intrusion into her serene awareness. Her reasoning for the delayed intervention was even more infuriatingly logical. She believed the demon, a cunning, cowardly beast, would never have dared to reveal itself had she been present from the start. We were bait. She then delivered her chilling final pronouncement, her gaze piercing through the chaos. Kenneth and I stared up at her, utterly speechless, our minds reeling from the sheer audacity of her plan and the impossible scale of her power. "It is quite astonishing how quickly you two became such good friends," Friend declared, her words completely out of left field, leaving us utterly flabbergasted. My jaw dropped, and a shocked gasp escaped my lips, mirrored precisely by Kenneth's own explosion of disbelief. Our synchronized reaction was the only appropriate response to such a ridiculous statement. Moments later, Kenneth and I stood, inexplicably calm, surveying the grotesque, utterly annihilated demon tongue that was now nothing more than mangled debris. My gaze fixed on Fran, a stark internal contrast raging within my mind, an overwhelming wave of realization crashing over me. My eyes darted towards him, a white-haired figure bare-chested, who offered a gentle smile, a faint blush dusting his cheeks. The sheer unexpectedness of his calm demeanor in this utterly chaotic landscape was jarring. I pondered the sheer, ludicrous scale of power it took to decimate such a colossal entity without even a single drop of sweat betraying the effort. My mind raced, grappling with the incredible display. Fran's power, I realized with a profound sense of awe and a hint of terror, was not merely impressive. It was on an entirely different, untouchable plane of existence. A low, questioning sound escaped my throat, a testament to my utter bewilderment. Fran, meanwhile, stood utterly still, her hands clasped together, lost in a profound, almost spiritual contemplation. She remained in that same posture, her head bowed, her expression serene yet intensely focused, as if communing with forces beyond my understanding. "What in the hells are you doing?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the silence, unable to comprehend her bizarre, tranquil state amidst the wreckage of our near demise. My mentor Fran delivered the chilling truth. That defeated demon, that horrifying creature, had once been human. She always performed this solemn prayer, a ritual of grim respect, after unleashing her devastating power upon them. She then dropped another bombshell, explaining that the sheer, uncontrolled deluge of magical energy could warp and twist any human into these monstrous abominations. It was a terrifying transformation, an absolute degradation of the soul. A terrifying understanding, a grim realization, settled deep within my very bones. The sheer weight of her words resonated with a dreadful clarity. My companion, Kenneth, ever the pragmatist, remained lost in a vortex of contemplation, his voice a low rumble of suspicion as he declared this entire situation was bizarre, twisted beyond expectation. He then unleashed his utter astonishment, raging about a supposed local reservoir of immense magical energy, a power source he, with all his knowledge, had never even glimpsed on any map, never heard whispered in any dark alley. The fury intensified as he grappled with the incomprehensible truth. A demon of this magnitude, a creature of such devastating power, manifesting so close to the very heart of the capital? It defied all logic, all reason. Fran, her voice now a low tremor, conceded that while such anomalies weren't entirely unprecedented in this brutal world, the oppressive unease surrounding this particular event was palpable, a suffocating shroud of wrongness. Then, a sound that ripped through the very fabric of my being, a primal, gut-wrenching scream tore from her throat as she shrieked, her voice a desperate, shattering plea for us to flee, to escape this crushing doom. Kenneth and I, caught in the eye of this terrifying storm, could only stare ahead, our minds reeling, our expressions etched with profound, unadulterated confusion at the sudden onslaught of this horrifying alarm. The very ground beneath my feet screamed in protest, a violent tremor as Kenneth and I scrambled, clawed, and desperately fought for purchase on the rapidly crumbling, disintegrating surface. This was pure chaos. The shockwave of surprise, a devastating blow to our senses, slammed into all three of us, unleashing an agonizing struggle against an unseen, malevolent force. We were caught in its cruel grip. Then the ultimate horror, a complete, total paralysis as terror itself became a physical weight, pinning Kenneth, Fran, and me. We were utterly frozen, helpless, thrashing against an overwhelming, invisible power that held us utterly captive. I could not move, my muscles screaming in futile protest. Even as my every fiber strained against this crushing dominance, a chilling, deliberate thought pierced the horrifying silence. This insidious, disembodied presence continued its chilling monologue, a profound, crushing disappointment dripping from its unseen words. It declared, with an almost casual contempt, that it had believed this child, the very demon Fran had destroyed, was one of its superior creations, a testament to its horrific craft. The arrogance was infuriating. Suddenly, a thunderous crack ripped through the air as an unseen, colossal foot slammed down, obliterating the very ground, sending sharp, deadly shards of earth exploding in every direction. The raw power was staggering. Kenneth and I were utterly blindsided, our eyes blown wide with an impossible shock, while Fran, ever vigilant, also reeled from the sheer, sudden, overwhelming surprise of this unseen, devastating threat. Then, from the dust and chaos, a figure materialized, cloaked and shadowed, but radiating an energy so monstrously overwhelming, so absolutely dominant, it crushed the very air from my lungs. A sudden, horrifying flash of recognition ripped through Fran's mind, her voice a strangled gasp of realization as she exclaimed, her eyes wide with dread, that she knew this impossible entity. The hooded figure, an avatar of serene, terrifying power, merely looked down upon us, a calm, almost dismissive sound escaping its lips, a prelude to our inevitable doom. Then the words, delivered with a chilling, quiet fury, like a death knell, Fran, it declared, had dared to tear its child to pieces. My blood ran cold at the implication. Its voice, a venomous hiss, continued its horrifying judgment, condemning all of humanity as ugly, deceptive creatures, fit only for its ruthless dominion. Fran, defiance burning in her eyes even in the face of such overwhelming power, challenged its horrifying assertion, daring to question the very word created. The hooded figure, momentarily thrown, reacted with an intense, confused glare, its serene facade cracking. Then a desperate, almost pathetic tremor in its voice, a demand raw and urgent. Who was she? The question hung heavy, with terrifying implications. Before I could even blink, an unseen, monstrous force erupted from its extended hand, a wave of pure, concentrated power slamming into me, into Kenneth, and into Fran, an absolutely devastating, crushing blow. The sheer, brutal impact drove us into the ravaged earth, pinning us, helpless and broken, beneath its overwhelming, invisible weight. A guttural grunt of agony tore from Fran's lips as the impact brutalized her, a sound of profound suffering. I was utterly, brutally pinned, clutching my head in blinding agony, my vision swimming, while Fran's screams of tortured struggle echoed, a terrifying testament to our complete, utter defeat. Kenneth, his voice now a broken whisper, articulated the crushing, overwhelming disbelief and despair that gripped us all, the grim reality of this sudden, catastrophic turn. His words, steeped in desperation, questioned the very limits of power, wondering if even the legendary strength of Lady Fran, my revered mentor, could possibly withstand this unholy, unstoppable force. The hooded figure, a terrifying silhouette of menacing power, stood dominant over us, radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated destruction, an oppressive weight that promised only annihilation. Kenneth and I lay there, utterly defeated, lifeless bodies pinned to the ravaged earth, our power utterly, completely eclipsed, outmatched beyond any shadow of hope. But Kenneth, even in the face of such absolute, overwhelming despair, unleashed a final, furious glare, his hand somehow raising his pistol, aiming it directly at our insurmountable foe, his voice a roar of defiant rage. The hooded figure, with an infuriating, mocking contempt, dismissed Kenneth's desperate defiance, sneeringly calling him a mere naughty child, an insult that stoked the flames of my own impotent rage. Then, with horrifying ease, it unleashed another torrent of its monstrous, devastating energy, a crushing wave of pure power. Kenneth let out a strangled, gut-wrenching cry of pain as the overwhelming force slammed into him, his body collapsing in a ruined heap, his pistol clattering uselessly to the ravaged ground. We were truly broken. The hooded figure, its voice chillingly calm amidst our utter devastation, declared its horrifying intention. It would simply remake the demon, fashioning it into an even stronger, more formidable weapon. Lying there, utterly defeated, my body screaming in protest, I could only grapple with the sheer, overwhelming, monstrous power that had just obliterated us. It was a force beyond anything I had ever conceived. But even in that moment of absolute despair, a terrifying, impossible possibility, a glimmer of desperate defiance, ignited within the depths of my shattered mind. My world exploded with a swift, cataclysmic impact, tearing at the very fabric of existence around me. This brutal remaking process, an unholy violation, violently dismembered and dissolved a body, twisting it into grotesque, nightmarish organic forms before my very eyes. The demon's abhorrent body violently disintegrated, its essence scattering into the void. I lay prone on the ravaged ground, a guttural cry of agony tearing from my throat as a suffocating, dark aura erupted from my very being. I remained utterly splayed, pinned down, struggling with every fiber of my being against an unseen, crushing force that sought to obliterate me. What in the abyssal depths was happening? I screamed the question internally as raw, unbridled dark energy consumed my entire surroundings, the very earth beneath me groaning and cracking under its impossible weight. My wide, searing blue eyes, portals to pure, unadulterated shock and terror, stared into the encroaching abyss. I demanded to know the meaning of this monstrous assault. Then, from the very heart of the fractured earth, an unknown, hooded person erupted, rising with a devastating, earth-shattering impact. The demon, no longer disintegrated but reborn, stood impossibly firm on the fractured earth, radiating an overwhelming torrent of dark energy. It was ready for absolute destruction. The enigmatic hooded figure swirled with sinister grace around the resurrected demon, a silent, chilling question of ultimate devastation hanging in the air. Then, with a sickening swiftness, the demon's colossal hand closed around Fran's head. It lifted her, a mere puppet, into the air, her face twisted in pure, heartbreaking distress. The demon, a true monstrosity of the void, held Fran violently captive, a horrifying tentacle coiling around her as its grotesque mouth gaped open. She struggled, her desperate defiance of futile effort against its impossible strength. I lay there, utterly defeated, sprawled on the desolate, cracked ground, powerless. Yet, even as I was trapped in this crushing defeat, my eye began to glow with an intense, raw power, a nascent inferno stirring within me. The demon, an engine of pure horror, pulled Fran into its cavernous maw, devouring her. In that cataclysmic moment, the undeniable, soul-shattering realization ripped through me. Fran was being killed. A searing flashback, a phantom memory, ignited in my mind. Fran, her radiant smile a beacon, gently touched my face, her voice echoing with the promise of everyone's safe return, without a single scratch, and her unwavering, impossible hopes for me. Amidst the encroaching darkness, I desperately tried to utter a single word, but it was choked off, an unbearable agony silencing my very soul. No, I did cry out. A desperate, raw, earth-shattering scream to stop this monstrous act, to halt the inevitable. And then an impossible, overwhelming surge of intense power, a cataclysmic force, began to erupt from the very core of my being. The unknown, hooded figure, now intertwined with the demon, forcefully gripped Fran's head once more, their combined, radiating power causing her unspeakable, agonizing distress. My teeth ground together, a menacing, bone-jarring symphony of raw, unfathomable fury. This was my breaking point. The demon's colossal hand aggressively seized Fran, ripping her from the very ground, and she thrashed with a raw, primal terror as a sickening stream of saliva dripped from its gaping maw. Its monstrous mouth yawned open before her, an abyss of death, its grotesque tongue extending like a vile serpent. Then, with an act of unspeakable savagery, it violently crushed her face. She writhed, a sickening display of pure, unadulterated terror. My world imploded as I watched the agony contort her suffering face, a desperate struggle etched into her features. Lying broken and defeated on the shattered ground, my very essence screamed for Fran. My wide eye, a desolate mirror of my immense despair, reflected the horrifying certainty that Fran was about to be obliterated. Yet, even amidst that suffocating despair, a flicker of memory pierced my shattered mind, a moment of pure joy, recalling our sacred shared goal, for everyone to return home safely. I remembered Fran's warm smile, the gentle touch on my surprised head, her voice ringing with absolute belief as she declared her high hopes for me. My bloodied, tattered legs convulsed on the ground, a desperate, futile struggle as I clawed for words. My blood-soaked leg, fueled by a nascent, uncontrollable fury, pressed against the unforgiving ground, and with a terrible groan, it began to crack. I fought to articulate the command, the desperate plea, urging them, demanding them, to stop this abomination. Then, with a primal, earth-shattering roar, I finally unleashed my voice, screaming for them to stop. From the periphery of this unfolding hellscape, an unknown, hooded figure observed my agony, their glowing yellow eyes piercing the chaos with an unsettling intensity. Fran, her face now a canvas of horror, watched, a clawed hand pressed tight over her mouth, muffling her own desperate cries. Kenneth's face, a stark testament to the sheer terror, was etched with an undeniable alarm and paralyzing fear. I screamed again, my entire being convulsing, racked by an overwhelming, surging force of raw, untamed energy. This colossal power erupted from my core, a blazing beacon signaling an irreversible, monstrous transformation. I fully manifested, my monstrous form bursting forth, an absolute spectacle of overwhelming power. I let loose a guttural, earth-shaking roar as pure, destructive energy surged from every inch of my body. My chest and shoulders rippled with the sheer, uncontrolled might of this surging power, my monstrous transformation reaching its terrifying, absolute peak. My newly monstrous face, a terrifying visage of primal fury, revealed a wide, malevolent grin and teeth like sharpened blades. My eyes, now ablaze, glowed with an utterly destructive, obliterating power. Kenneth, witnessing my horrific grandeur, choked on a sound of utter shock and raw disbelief. With a terrifying ease, I concentrated that raw, surging might, forming a pulsating orb of devastating energy in my palm. My phenomenal energy orb, a sphere of pure, unadulterated obliteration, then erupted. A massive, blinding explosion of untold power instantly engulfed the entire battlefield. I, a force of vengeance, unleashed a concentrated, annihilating blast from my palm while still suspended midair, striking the demon with impossible force and violently bursting straight through its very chest. But even as I struck, another monstrous demon hand, swift and insidious, seized Fran, its crushing grip wrapping around her already terrified face, her wide red eyes reflecting pure, unadulterated terror. My own expression twisted into a tormented grimace as power, uncontrollable and violent, continued to erupt in devastating waves from my chest and upper body. The unknown hooded figure, an enigma amidst the devastation, watched impassively as the dust and debris settled around them with a heavy, final thud. A dreadful, echoing silence followed, an unnerving calm after the cataclysm. I lay amidst the scattered debris, utterly spent, groaning with the crushing weight of exhaustion. The hooded figure then emitted a low, assertive sound, a ripple of something new in the silence. They stood, an imposing silhouette against the ruined landscape, their voice echoing with an undeniable power as they spoke to my collapsed form, declaring me amazing. They continued their observation, their words cutting through the air, commenting on my sheer, ridiculous ability to move, to even exist, within that impossibly powerful gravity field. The mysterious figure continued their unsettling monologue, emphasizing my power even more, making my very existence feel like an anomaly. Then, defying all logic and exhaustion, I rose from the ground, my own power surging once more around me, a defiant aura against the destruction. The hooded figure, now a focal point, seemed to ponder the very nature of my erupting power, recalling some previous, enigmatic flame. They openly wondered if that ancient, furious flame was even of this world, a question that sent a chill down my spine. With a deliberate motion, the hooded figure's foot descended, impacting the decimated ground with profound weight. They simply stated, their voice devoid of true emotion, that my power was interesting. That crimson-ored figure's foot then landed with a thunderous impact, cracking the very ground beneath them and sending shards of debris flying in every direction. They were preparing for action, a terrifying promise in their very stance. Then, with an unsettling gentleness, this enigmatic being made direct contact with my eyes. My own bloodshot eye, now a burning beacon with a vibrant red pupil, pulsed with a faint, ominous glow. My intensely glowing red eye expanded, a crimson sun manifesting within a swirling dark void, ready to annihilate any obstruction. A shadowy figure, cloaked and ominous, spread his arms wide, his laughter echoing through the abyss as he declared his absolute recognition of my overwhelming power. He revealed the monumental truth, the very core of my existence. I had forged an unbreakable pact with a god from another world, a being of unimaginable might. Then, a smaller void bubble erupted, and the insidious purple-cloaked demon materialized, his voice dripping with venomous envy. My primary adversary then made a contrasting statement, dismissing the demon's claim with a wave of his hand. He then expressed outright disbelief, questioning what I, Laika, could possibly offer to such a formidable entity. His sinister face materialized, confirming his earlier, audacious statement, his intentions now laid bare. His eyes widened with an intense, predatory focus, clashing starkly with the distressed texture now appearing in my own vision. Suddenly, a searing flame pierced directly through my adversary's chest, a direct hit from my unleashed fury. I then unleashed an overwhelming torrent of fire upwards, a pillar of pure destruction that ripped through the void. My adversary reacted with a profound jolt of surprise, caught utterly off guard by my explosive retaliation. My face strained, sweat beading on my brow, as I cursed his incessant, piercing declarations that had been ringing in my ears for an agonizing eternity. A devastating impact struck my adversary's upper body, tearing and deforming his cloak, a testament to my raw, unbridled power. He violently crashed into the desolate ground below, forming an immense, gaping impact crater that swallowed the very earth. The battle's ferocity had taken its toll, and I lay prone and utterly exhausted on the debris-strewn ground, my immense power temporarily drained. Fran and Kenneth caught their breath, their shock palpable. Kenneth, his voice hoarse, asked if I had finally defeated the impossible enemy. Fran reached out, her touch trembling with disbelief, her expression a mixture of profound surprise and crushing concern. She let out a soft exclamation, the sheer magnitude of the recent events finally settling upon her bewildered mind. Amidst the scattered debris lay a torn cloak and tattered bandages, revealing a horrifying truth. It had been nothing more than an empty shell, a grotesque disguise. Fran recoiled in utter surprise, staring at the discarded cloak. Her eyes widened with profound shock and a chilling realization. She questioned aloud if it had been nothing more than a puppet, a mere construct of shadow. The chilling truth dawned upon her, that the puppet had been remotely controlled all along. Kenneth, still grappling with the concept of such remote manipulation, called out my name, a desperate plea in his voice. Fran, her face etched with deep distress and wide, concerned eyes, stated simply that I had fainted. Still distressed, she considered the puppet, understanding its implications. She realized that my adversary was still a relevant threat, still a terrifying force. She believed he was creating allies, a network of power. Fran then considered his immense strength, a power that defied all logic. She thought aloud that no human should be capable of such an impossible feat. Then, her face twisted in a sudden, intense shock, a new and horrifying realization dawning upon her. Her dawning insight transformed into a profound and utterly unsettling thought that chilled her to the bone. The yellow cardigan woman looked up in utter shock, her mouth agape and eyes wide with dawning horror as she uttered the name of the magic master. Fran's shock deepened, her gasp catching in her throat as she choked out the name Ruler Tempest, finally realizing the terrifying identity of this immensely powerful figure. The scene shifted dramatically to a vibrant, sun-drenched town nestled peacefully in green hills, distant voices calling out the name Tempest, a name now echoing with new, chilling significance. A door opened, revealing a young girl in the doorway, her expression questioning and slightly annoyed, asking if someone was sleeping yet again. Inside, the red-blue robed man, with his long white hair, lay peacefully asleep on a couch, a book resting on his serene face. The black hat girl's distinctive hat was visible nearby. Ruler Tempest stirred slightly on the couch, emitting a soft groan, the book remaining undisturbed on his face. Kenneth, my unwavering pillar, carried my broken form, his desperate voice a thunderous command for me to cling to existence, to endure the overwhelming pain. Fran, my fierce, loyal companion, moved with us, her presence a silent, unyielding support as we trekked through the dense, verdant forest path. He would not stop, my formidable ally, Kenneth, assuring my fading consciousness that the majestic royal capital, our sanctuary, would soon be within our grasp. My world, however, was a suffocating abyss, my eyes sealed shut against the raw agony, surrendering to the crushing, inescapable darkness of unconsciousness. Then, in the searing, fractured depths of my mind, a horrifying vision erupted. A bare, white-haired titan, a true god of combat, soaring through the air, utterly vanquished. Below him, a menacing, black-cloaked figure, a true harbinger of despair, unleashed a laugh of absolute, sickening triumph. It was a memory, a nightmare, a fragment of my past that clawed at my very soul, threatening to pull me further into the abyss. My scarred face, a testament to unyielding torment and countless battles, became a mask of grim, internal contemplation. How I mused with a bitter, simmering fury. Could anyone dare to offer such a monstrous, insidious thing? What twisted design, what ultimate betrayal, lay behind such a soul-shattering proposition? My memory honed in on the vile truth itself. An ornate goblet, gleaming with deceptive beauty, cradling a thick, pulsating purple liquid. Its very existence was an affront, a a promise of unimaginable, corrupting power wrapped in the most sinister darkness. The choice, the ultimate damnation, had been laid before me. My glorious, towering castle stood sentinel under the vast, indifferent sky, while far below, the whispers began. They dared to theorize about my very existence, wondering if I, Laika, had forged an unbreakable, world-shattering pact with an otherworldly deity. The grim crucible of their judgment was deep within the Night Order headquarters, buried in the earth like a shameful secret. Those grave, imposing figures, the so-called pillars of their order, stood arrayed in that cold, brick chamber, their eyes burning with scrutiny, all fixated on me. Yet, there I was, Laika, utterly oblivious to their petty machinations, sprawled out in a powerful, exhausted slumber against their crude wooden table. Fourth Branch Commander Grift, his face a mask of iron resolve, spewed forth his grave pronouncements. He declared that if their ludicrous theories about me held any truth, it would shatter the very bedrock of their precious Night Order. But then, 6th Branch Vice Commander Jack, his eyes practically bulging from his head, threw his arms wide in an almost comedic gesture of awe. He bellowed that I had manifested a divine instrument of such ridiculous, gargantuan scale it defied all earthly comprehension. My power, an overwhelming display of a massive flaming sword, had utterly scorched their memories. Jack, in his newfound clarity, stammered that I seemed useful. Useful? As if my power could be so simply categorized. Even Kieran, ever the pragmatist, was forced to concede, nodding in reluctant agreement to this outrageous understatement. Kieran's gaze dropped, heavy with contemplation, as he admitted that I, the boy, had relentlessly proven myself an invaluable, absolutely devastating asset in every brutal confrontation. But then the incessant drone of 9th Branch Commander Kieran began, her voice dripping with venom. She raged that to trust the whispers of an unidentified man was an act of utter, catastrophic absurdity. Gavin, with his usual grim pronouncements, asserted that the reports dared to suggest I might be a magic master, a risk too colossal, too utterly destructive, for an organization that demanded absolute, pristine certainty in every single one of its components. Vice Commander Gavin, relentlessly pounding his self-righteous gavel, continued his damning speech. He claimed I only sowed chaos, as if chaos wasn't precisely what was needed to reshape their pathetic world. His intense blue eye burned with a terrifying, unyielding resolve, a testament to his rigid, unwavering fear of what I represented. Arthur, her expression grave and laser-focused, cut through the tension, her voice ringing out as she called to Fran. She sternly demanded Fran's unvarnished opinion, seeking her insights as a supposed objective observer. Fran, caught in the relentless glare, clasped her hands in a nervous grip, her gaze darting away, her face a storm of worry and profound thought. Fran, her features contorted by intense trouble, replayed the impossible scenario in her mind. She agonized over how she and Kenneth had been utterly paralyzed, rendered completely immobile by the sheer overwhelming pressure of that situation. She was forced to concede the terrifying truth. Only one being, I, Laika, possessed the colossal power to even stand against that encroaching menace. A cold, stark realization gripped her soul. They would have been brutally obliterated, utterly annihilated if I, Laika, had not descended like a whirlwind of salvation. But then a terrifying, fresh revelation surged through Fran's tormented mind. She began to question the very nature of my boundless, uncontrolled power. Fran finally grasped the crushing reality. Such immense, cataclysmic power as mine could never truly be leashed, never truly contained. Gavin, ever the meticulous record-keeper of my perceived flaws, heard the grim reports of my struggles. He coldly articulated the devastating truth. That I, the kid, would collapse, utterly spent and broken from exhaustion, every single time I unleashed the full, unbridled force of my power. Gavin's face, etched with weary disbelief and genuine pain, twisted as he questioned if such an overwhelming report could possibly be real, if I could truly possess such a volatile gift. He railed against the very notion, wondering how this monumental, utterly unstable situation could ever be deemed even remotely under control. Arthur, her eyes cast downward in profound contemplation, finally acknowledged the colossal gravity of the unfolding events. The overriding imperative crystallized in her mind. They needed desperately to ascertain if I could master the terrifying tempest that was my own power. The relentless inquisition raged on, their pathetic discourse fixated on whether I was a suitable fit for their archaic Night Order. They deluded themselves into believing that if they could only pigeonhole me, if they could simply define my immense presence, then all their trivial worries would miraculously vanish. Kieran, Fran, Grift, and even the now silent Jack stood as a frozen tableau in that tense, suffocating council. Arthur, with a decisive shift, addressed Gavin, declaring that she was absorbing every single word of their previous, frenzied discussions. Then, her gaze locking onto him, she directly challenged Gavin. She demanded to know what monumental feat, what impossible trial, would finally break through Gavin's intense, unyielding skepticism and truly convince him of my undeniable reality. Gavin, his expression as stern and unyielding as granite, uttered the sacred words, speaking of the legendary trial of the guarded flame. He gazed into the middle distance, his mind already consumed by deep reflection, intently observing the impossible demands of this ancient ordeal. He delivered his ultimatum, declaring that merely surviving, merely passing this cataclysmic trial, was the absolute bare minimum requirement for my existence within their sphere. Fran and Kieran, their faces mirroring a terrifying, synchronized tableau of utter shock and profound surprise, reeled from his audacious declaration. Then, the dam broke within Fran, and she began to unleash her torrent of frantic, desperate thoughts. Arthur's voice, cold as the abyss, declared my fate, ordering Jack to perform the inevitable, to mend my shattered frame. I was stretched out, a mere vessel upon the brutal healing table, Jack's monstrous energy coursing through me with a brief, dismissive comment as Kieran and Fran watched the raw spectacle of my mending. Then, the true horror, Arthur, with a grim determination that chilled my very soul, announced they were unleashing me into the deepest pits of hell itself. A subtle, terrifying smile twisted at the corners of his lips, a silent promise of the inferno awaiting me. A voice, unseen but utterly dominant, commanded my complete and utter repair, demanding I be patched up with a thoroughness that bordered on the grotesque. The world faded, and I plunged into a forced, tormented sleep. An eternity of oblivion devoured me. Then the awakening. Violent, cataclysmic chaos erupted around me, a swirling maelstrom of furious red and insidious purple that consumed the very fabric of my dark prison. My teeth ground together, a desperate testament to the sheer, impossible exertion ripping through my being. From the crushing, abyssal darkness, an ancient, disembodied voice erupted in a mocking, chilling laugh. It spoke, its tone shifting with a sudden, dreadful realization that echoed through my very bones. Then the monstrous truth was unveiled, a horrifying contract forged with a primordial god, an entity ripped from the fabric of another, unimaginable world. The entire reality around me shattered, transforming into a deep red, infernal wasteland of broken structures and glowing, malevolent fragments, as the unseen entity hammered home the terrifying origin of that otherworldly deity. The overwhelming crimson environment flared with unimaginable intensity, and the unseen entity, its presence now a crushing weight, declared with absolute certainty. It was a god. Amidst this continuing, destructive, deep red hellscape, the unseen speaker paused, a dramatic silence that spoke volumes of its ancient power. The infernal red environment solidified, revealing more distinct, agonizingly shattered structures, each a testament to unimaginable devastation. Then the entity's voice, laced with raw disbelief, questioned the very offering that had brought it forth. Intense red light erupted, illuminating the destruction as the unseen entity repeated its monstrous disbelief, scornfully stating that my offering was merely something like that. The audacity! A powerful, crescent-shaped eye, vast and ancient, tore open the darkness, its malevolent gaze a terrifying mark of the speaker's ominous, overwhelming presence. Faint red glowing symbols pulsed ominously in the dark, oppressive void as the entity, its disgust palpable, unleashed its contempt upon my very existence. My voice, a desperate tremor, tore through the suffocating darkness, demanding to know what monstrous presence dared to assault me. I roared, a desperate, raw shout for it to silence its atrocious voice, to cease its torment. My screams ripped through the void, intense and primal, my face a mask of contorted agony amidst the utterly chaotic struggle for my very sanity. Then, just as suddenly, the agonizing screams ceased, and I abruptly awakened, my body jarringly solid in a soft bed, utterly confused by these new, unfamiliar surroundings. Kenneth sat nearby, a strange red book clutched in his hands, his presence a stark contrast to the hell I had just endured. Kenneth, with an infuriating calm, simply stated that I was finally awake. Still trapped in the soft prison of the bed, I slowly turned my head, my gaze dazed and unfocused upon Kenneth, my mind reeling from the transition. He continued to sit there, utterly serene, his face now clearly visible, still clutching that enigmatic red book. He then casually mentioned that even their most potent healing techniques had been unleashed upon my ravaged form. Then, with an exasperated air, he questioned how long I intended to remain in this state of oblivion. His words carried the crushing implication that I had been lost to unconsciousness for an unfathomable, terrifyingly long time. The hours bled into an endless night, marked only by the glittering, cold expanse of the starry sky. I, with a desperate need to escape the subject of my own terrifying ordeal, brutally changed the subject. My voice, still raw, demanded information about another, a crucial figure in this unfolding drama. Kenneth, with a deceptive calm, tried to reassure me that everything was agonizingly okay. He confirmed, with a careful tone, that the immediate, crushing danger had finally receded from my path. He then looked away, his gaze falling, a troubled expression and a faint, almost imperceptible blush coloring his face. Still groggy, still fighting against the lingering shadows of my ordeal, I could only manage a hesitant, questioning sound. My voice, low and insistent, pressed Kenneth, demanding to know the true meaning behind his sudden agitation. Then, in a stunning admission, Kenneth thanked me, claiming I had single-handedly saved them all. He then confessed, his voice laced with a surprising tremor, that my prolonged unconsciousness had filled him with an unexpected, profound worry. My mind, still reeling, registered his declaration with a silent, profound shock. He worried about me? I pressed him, my voice edged with disbelief, demanding to know if he truly felt such a ridiculous, illogical concern for my well-being. Kenneth, his blush now more pronounced, fiercely defended his worry, his voice asserting that my heroic act of saving them all made his concern utterly natural. He declared, with a sudden, forceful conviction, that his apprehension for my fate was nothing less than a perfectly natural response. My own face flushed with a bewildering surprise, my mind still grappling with the truly astonishing possibility that Kenneth, of all people, had genuinely harbored a deep, personal worry for my survival. Kenneth averted his gaze, a telltale blush painting his face as he clutched a book. I knew in that moment my friend was an open book himself, utterly incapable of deception. Yet, the triviality of his current secret instantly vanished from my mind. His flustered demeanor persisted, a clear sign of his inner turmoil. He managed a hurried expression of thanks, though his shock was still overwhelming. My own surprise must have been evident, stark against Kenneth's strangely neutral gaze. My eyes then fell upon the formidable figure of Kieran, who stood with an unyielding, direct stare. His expression was stern, etched with a profound weariness that spoke of immense burdens. "Branch Commander Kieran," I uttered, recognizing the sheer authority radiating from him. He apologized, a perfunctory gesture, for disturbing my recovery, as if mere inconvenience could touch my rising power. Then, with the weight of destiny in his voice, Kieran announced a decision had been made regarding my future. My future? I demanded, my voice cutting through the sudden tension. In the study, I sat up, a deep concern etched on my own features, while a startled Kenneth remained by my side. Kieran, unyielding, reiterated his declaration. A decision about my destiny had been irrevocably made. My surprise was absolute, a powerful shockwave, as Kieran dropped the thunderbolt. I would undergo the trial of the guarded flame. Kenneth exploded beside me, his eyes wide with a disbelief that matched my own, an outcry ripping from his very soul. I remained in a whirlwind of surprise and utter confusion, my mind struggling to grasp the concept. A trial? What in the blazing depths was a trial? From beside the bed, Kenneth, a storm of distress and frustration, vehemently opposed the very idea. He railed against it, arguing it was a reckless, suicidal endeavor for someone as new and untempered as myself. Kieran merely pointed, his gaze like steel, and declared with chilling gravity that he was the official administrator of this perilous trial. My confusion persisted, a fog of uncertainty swirling around my mind as I admitted I did not fully comprehend the cataclysmic situation unfolding before my very eyes. Then, a dangerous thought ignited within me. What impossible heights awaited if I were to pass this formidable trial? Would passing this gauntlet mean my formal recognition, my definitive ascendancy into the legendary Knight Order? Kenneth reacted with a sharp, incredulous gasp to my question, branding it with an intensity that bordered on outrage. He called me an idiot, his voice laced with an almost desperate exasperation. Then, with a sudden shift, Kenneth began to formally introduce the terrifying trial of the guarded flame. He explained it was not just a test, but the ultimate crucible to forge an executive candidate, a warrior destined for the highest echelons of power. He pressed on, detailing the trial's utterly rigorous, soul-crushing requirements. Mere recommendations were typically needed just to attempt this trial, he thundered, emphasizing that 2 or more branch commanders were an absolute prerequisite. These recommendations, he clarified, were founded upon a lifetime of unparalleled work experience and earth-shattering achievements. Then, with a sudden, electrifying intensity, Kenneth turned his focus directly to me. His disbelief was a roaring torrent as he expressed how utterly insane it was that I, who had only just awakened my divine magic, was being subjected to such an impossible trial. He branded the trial for me as nothing less than a brutal, calculated execution. A jolt of startled concern ripped through me, cold sweat beading on my brow at the sheer, overwhelming gravity of his words. Kieran's voice then cut through the tension, a stern, unwavering warning not to ever take this monstrous exam lightly. He explained, with a chilling calm, that only a vanishingly small number ever passed. 1/3 of those who failed, he stated, were driven to madness by the sheer, overwhelming difficulty before delivering the final, crushing blow. Or else. He trailed off, the unspoken threat of my imminent death hanging heavy in the air. He then laid out the ultimate ultimatum. If I did not wish to face oblivion, I must challenge this trial as if I were already prepared for my own glorious demise. Kenneth, his face etched with concern, turned his head to call out to me, his gaze finding my seemingly dejected form in the background. I mused inwardly, a whirlwind of thoughts, about this impossible situation, admitting that its true, terrifying depths still eluded my full comprehension. But then, a steel resolve ignited within my very core. I would take this critical, earth-shattering step, knowing with absolute certainty that it was my only remaining option, my single path to ultimate power. I decided then and there to risk my entire, burgeoning life. I resolved to pour every ounce of my burgeoning strength, every fiber of my being, into this monumental challenge. 5 days later, a mere blink of an eye, the day of reckoning arrived. Kieran and I stood, two titans of fate, poised and ready outside the gaping maw of the cave. Kieran began to unveil the devastating secrets of the trial to me. He declared it consisted of two main, grueling parts, his two raised fingers emphasizing the duality of my coming torment and triumph. Kieran, with an almost casual flick of his wrist, explained the initial phase. I would simply survive within this echoing cavern for 3 agonizing days. My blood thrummed with the challenge. But my spirit, always hungry for the ultimate test, immediately demanded to know the true nature of the trial, the shattering second part. His next gesture was a revelation, a sudden, shocking declaration of the second phase that left my mind reeling, utterly blindsided and bewildered by its overwhelming implications. Then, with an almost deliberate slowness after his earth-shattering pronouncement, Kieran placed a small, unassuming white candle directly into my waiting palm. My gaze narrowed, my very being questioning the ridiculous simplicity of the object. Was this truly just a candle? He then issued a command that resonated with a bizarre kind of power. Pour your formidable essence into it. I gripped the fragile wax, my every fiber concentrating as I channeled my overwhelming, unrestrained power into its core, a magnificent surge of my own internal dominion. The response was instantaneous and cataclysmic. I recoiled, a shockwave of surprise hitting me as the candle didn't just light, but erupted with a monstrous, roaring inferno. A primal gasp tore from my throat. The heat was an unleashed, unbearable force against my skin. Kieran's voice then cut through the sudden, blinding brilliance of my new flame, issuing his precise, unwavering instructions. My absolute mandate, my overwhelming burden, was to ensure that this glorious, explosive flame, born of my own power, would never be extinguished. For 3 relentless days and 3 terrifying nights, I was to be its sole guardian, its impenetrable shield. The true, soul-crushing weight of this impossible, monumental task crashed down upon me then, threatening to overwhelm my very core. My voice, a mere whisper against the inferno's roar, echoed my disbelief. Protecting this flame? It was then that Kieran's expression turned grim, his warning a thunderclap. This beacon of my power, this blazing inferno, would draw every monstrous horror, every lurking abomination, directly to my absolute domain. The sheer, brutal shock of his words hit me like a physical blow, electrifying my entire being with a sudden, chilling dread. His next words were an urgent, almost desperate plea, a final, chilling directive. I absolutely could not perish. And with that, the crucible of my existence, the ultimate trial, truly began. The void itself shuddered, a single drop of water striking an unseen surface, sending out colossal ripples and a deep, resonating hum that vibrated through my very bones. In my unwavering grasp, a single lit white candle defied the absolute darkness, its fragile flame my only beacon, illuminating the encroaching abyssal gloom around me. I found myself standing, an insignificant speck, within a colossal, shadowed cavern. My tiny candle's light barely pierced the oppressive expanse. A desperate sound escaped my lips, immediately answered by another, chilling, unknown echo from the boundless depths. The sheer weight of the air, thick and suffocating, made it impossible to draw a full breath into my burning lungs. The very atmosphere pulsed with an overwhelming, tangible magic essence, so dense it choked me, a raw, untamed power that settled heavily in my very bones. This desolate cave was a nexus of pure, raw magic, an insane concentration that dwarfed even the notoriously potent North. Such an overwhelming saturation of essence could only mean one thing. An impossible, countless horde of monstrous abominations awaited me. That insufferable blue hair man had already laid down my brutal decree. 2 impossible tasks. My destiny was sealed. The first, a ludicrous challenge. Survive for 3 agonizing days and nights within this monstrous maw, this cavern infested with rampant, ravenous beasts. I began my perilous advance, my single candle a minuscule defense against the monumental shadows. Even then, I sensed a gargantuan, formless mass stirring in the crushing darkness ahead. My gaze, unyielding, narrowed into slits of absolute resolve. These daunting trials would not break me. But the second task, that was the true impossible burden. My every fiber had to ensure this pathetic candle's flame, my sole fragile hope, would never, ever be extinguished. A colossal purple centipede, a nightmare of chitin and venom, seemed to ponder its next devastating move against me, its presence a throbbing pressure in the darkness. If this wretched candle burned itself into oblivion, if its wick gave out, my entire existence would be deemed a catastrophic failure. With a primal roar of pure defiance, I lunged forward, unleashing a devastating, explosive attack into the encroaching terror. My brutal assault landed with an earth-shattering impact, a wave of raw power erupting from my very core. I drove my attack home with furious might, watching my monstrous foe recoil, its grotesque form shuddering from the sheer force of my strike. Determination etched into my face. I was utterly spent, a bead of sweat tracing a path down my temple, a testament to the colossal effort I had poured into that single desperate blow. My grip tightened around the candle, its flame flaring with an impossible, almost violent intensity. This cursed flame, this fragile light, was devouring my very essence, burning with my overwhelming power as its catastrophic fuel. I had to reel it in, focus my absolute will to constrict my overflowing power, like desperately narrowing a raging river into a trickling stream. My face contorted in a mask of strained concentration, every fiber of my being dedicated to this impossible mental battle. I struggled, fiercely striving to calm the raging storm within my core, to stabilize my wildly fluctuating abilities. A ragged sigh of pure, unadulterated relief tore from my chest. I had done it. I had wrestled my chaotic power back into a semblance of control. My powers now reined in. I stood once more, cautiously surveying the eerie, blue-tinged cavern, my candle a stark contrast in its chilling luminescence. A weary sigh escaped my lips as my gaze swept across the oppressive, deadly landscape, dread twisting in my gut. Then came the chilling realization. A bell, a brutal harbinger of doom, was set to reverberate through this entire nightmare realm in 3 agonizing days. A shockwave of pure dread hit me, my face contorting in a mixture of disbelief and utter horror. The brutal instructions materialized, stark and unforgiving. I must continue to shield this agonizing flame, protect it with my very life, until that final, decisive bell tolled. The cave, once merely dim, now unveiled its true, grotesque horrors. Spiky purple abominations, writhing masses of worms, and leathery bat-winged terrors swarmed the edges of my vision, a tide of pure nightmare. One spiky purple monstrosity lurched forward, its hideous yellow eyes glowing with malevolent hunger, its drooling maw a gaping portal to oblivion. I grimaced, a fierce, primal snarl tearing at my lips as raw, untamed energy shimmered and pulsed around my form. Succeed in this impossible trial, protect this infernal flame, and I would be elevated, formally recognized as a formidable member of the revered Night Order. A jagged bolt of pure, blinding light rent the overwhelming darkness, a brutal flash of reality. But if I failed, if I could not shield that flickering spark, countless grotesque, multi-legged horrors, bathed in a sickly purple glow, already swarmed the landscape of my doom. Failure was not an option. Failure meant an agonizing, definitive death at the hands of these relentless demons. Monsters, a chaotic, swirling vortex of death, lurked in every shadow. I screamed the truth to the unfeeling abyss. This task was utterly, ridiculously, monumentally impossible. I was caught mid-air, enveloped by an unrelenting, powerful force. A grimace of pure agony contorted my face, my muscles screaming with every fiber of my being. My mind raced, calculating the odds with ferocious precision. If I chose caution, if I simply lingered for 3 measly days, I would be utterly cornered, my fate sealed by these pathetic creatures. That was an unacceptable future. I thought decisively, my spirit igniting, ready to unleash absolute destruction. My eye narrowed, locking onto my impending doom with an intense focus as I activated a formidable, earth-shattering power. The monsters surrounding me recoiled, their horrid mouths gaping open in an alarming display of surprise and pure terror. Their shock was my signal. I decided then and there to make the insignificant candle flame I wielded ridiculously huge, an inferno of unparalleled scale. The monstrous flame surged, burning with an almost sentient hunger, attracting even more grotesque creatures to my absolute domain. This was my intent, my grand design. I would draw every last one of them, every single foul beast, directly into my ultimate snare. My face twisted into an aggressive snarl, a savage declaration of war, as I roared my intention to finish every single foe simultaneously. Now, engulfed in my own blazing aura, surrounded by a swirling vortex of aggressive, lunging monstrous creatures, I screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but a primal, unyielding release, an explosive manifestation of my raw, untamed abilities. My unleashed power manifested as the gigantic monsters around me were instantly obliterated, their forms scattered into countless fragments. A colossal explosion ripped through the very fabric of the landscape, consuming everything in its destructive path. I, the architect of this cataclysm, stood utterly caught in its epicenter. The massive detonation now revealed an intensely bright core, radiating an immense, horrifying power that threatened to shatter reality itself. Explosive energy fragmented outwards rapidly, leaving searing streaks and razor-sharp shards as it expanded with devastating force. The sharp energy shards continued their chaotic dance, exploding and scattering in every direction, an apocalyptic ballet of my making. I, the Purple Torch Man, now traversed a volcanic landscape forged from my own destructive will. My candlelit path carved through jagged rocks and rivers of molten lava, a testament to my raw endurance. I gritted my teeth, every muscle strained, my determination of visible force. What did my opponents think of this overwhelming display? Somewhere above, Kieran stood next to Kenneth, observing my glorious rampage. Kenneth looked utterly concerned as they witnessed my uncompromising strategy. He wondered if my audacious plan to defeat all the monsters first would somehow defy the true purpose of this trial. But I stood unyielding, dominant, in the heart of that fiery cavern. Kieran's eyes widened, his expression thoughtful as he continued to observe the unfolding events. He then expressed his profound amazement that my current absolutely insane strategy might actually succeed. Kieran's intensely focused gaze revealed his deep thought, his mind grappling with the impossible. He suddenly reconsidered his prior assumptions. He stomped, splashing water upwards from a shallow pool, a clear sign of his internal turmoil. He realized something was fundamentally wrong, something he could not comprehend. Kieran was profoundly shocked that such overwhelming power, my overwhelming power, was truly here. He simply thought it could not be true. Gavin, too, gazed forward, his expression stern, observing the sheer magnitude of my relentless, world-shaking dominance. While Kieran's gaze alone sliced through the oppressive air, a grim realization dawning in his formidable eyes, I clutched the pitiful, flickering candle, my breath ragged, each inhale a desperate battle against the suffocating void. My struggle was real. I, who had crushed legions of abominations beneath my heel, now faced the ignominious task of preserving this pathetic spark, a lifeline that needed to endure for 3 more impossibly long days. My will was absolute, even in this diminished state. My unwavering gaze locked onto the struggling flame, its minuscule, defiant dance a stark reminder of my precarious existence, its energy visibly waning. Then, from the absolute blackness, my eyes snagged on a pinprick of crimson, a faint, undeniable laser beam tearing through the gloom. It was an omen, a precursor to the cataclysm about to unleash itself. Alarm ripped through me, a primal jolt as the very air around my domain began to crackle, vibrating with an intensifying, malevolent energy that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I reeled, my mind momentarily fractured by sheer shock, as an earth-shattering blast erupted directly behind my position, its raw power threatening to disintegrate me on the spot. My eyes, usually unwavering, dilated with a potent cocktail of fear and blinding surprise as the swirling, chaotic energy coalesced, tightening its terrifying grip around my very being. This was raw power, unbound. But I am Laika. I braced, my stance shifting, every atom of my being snapping into combat readiness. Before me, a colossal shadow coalesced, revealing the impossibly massive leg and foot of something truly monstrous, Berserk itself. It clawed its way out of the suffocating darkness, a cacophony of grinding gears and menacing whirs announcing its grand, terrifying arrival. The mechanical titan fully revealed itself, a monstrous construct of pure destruction, its metallic limbs already bristling with a multitude of terrifying swords. My opponents are never simple. The air thrummed with its mechanical battle cries, a symphony of imminent annihilation. I craned my neck, my initial confusion a fleeting moment as I stared up at the fully manifested Berserk, its many blades a deadly, overwhelming arsenal. Kieran's gaze plunged downward, a chilling, absolute realization settling upon him, confirming the utter, undeniable truth of our horrifying discovery. There was no escaping this. He uttered the name, a whisper of dread. Berserk, developed by the Night Order. A betrayal of monumental proportions. And then, without warning, the monstrous construct unleashed pure devastation. A scorching laser beam lashing out directly at my position. I reacted, a blur of impossible speed, my body twisting just enough to barely evade its incinerating path, my surprise a raw, visceral shock. He was shouting, his voice a violent tremor through the comm device, demanding if Gavin, that absolute madman, had unleashed some experimental monster weapon for a test run. He wanted to know what Gavin was possibly thinking, his outrage palpable even from afar. But Gavin, that titan of ice, merely received the enraged call, his expression a mask of infuriating calm, eyes closed in absolute disdain. He told him not to be ridiculous, as if a rampaging prototype was just a minor inconvenience. This forest, he declared, was simply convenient for his little test. And oh, the cave my angry friend was holed up in? Just nearby. A mere detail in his grand, destructive scheme. My friend's frustration, a tangible, burning aura, was absolutely overflowing. Gavin's casual explanation was a complete insult, utterly unbelievable in its audacity. Gavin's voice then projected, cutting through the static, outlining the monstrous, unseen conditions of my trial. He warned him not to dare rush in and help me. This test, he declared with chilling precision, demanded my endurance through every impossible difficulty, every crushing unfairness. And me? Oh, I was struggling, my very core screaming in defiance. But the words were mine, a burning declaration. If I could not handle this, then I would utterly fail, because they had no need for someone like me. My friend's internal frustration was a palpable, volcanic eruption, his teeth grinding in sheer disbelief. But as the device beeped its chilling confirmation, he understood. He had to stand back. And that monster, Gavin? As soon as he had confirmation, a subtle, absolutely chilling smirk touched his lips, a knowing twist that promised nothing but chaos. Suddenly, a knock tore through that detached silence. Gavin, with his usual unnerving neutrality, looked up. Fran, the branch head herself, stood there, a warm smile on her face, holding a tray with tea. She stepped forward, presenting it like a servant, a role he clearly found baffling. She just called it a hobby, then asked about sugar. None, he dismissed. He sipped the tea she'd provided, this serene moment utterly disconnected from the brutal reality of my fight. She smiled, commenting on his good mood, a statement he thoughtfully considered. He wasn't in a bad mood, he mused, his thoughts drifting to the machinations of organizations, finding it better to have fewer concerns. And then there it was, a chilling reflection in a mirror. Me, Laika, caught in an action pose, utterly engulfed by a storm of laser beams. My struggle, a mere backdrop to his contemplation. Back in my domain, the massive white eye of Pink One Eye gleamed, sensing the sheer, monstrous power of the event unfolding. Its body contorted with a sharp, abrupt sound as Berserk unleashed an absolute torrent of laser beams directly at me. I was airborne, a blur of motion, desperately attempting to evade that overwhelming assault, but the sheer force of a massive explosion ripped through the air around me, sending me reeling. Frustration, a scorching inferno, ignited within me. I channeled intense, volatile energy directly into my hand, forming a potent, crackling orb of pure destruction, preparing for the absolute annihilation of a counterattack. Then, with an aggressive roar of defiance, I launched that powerful energy blast forward from the glowing object in my hand, utterly facing my challenge head-on with an unyielding will. My absolutely devastating attack erupted with immense, world-shattering force, instantly engulfing the entire area in a cataclysmic maelstrom. The powerful explosion continued its relentless, furious engulfment, and Berserk took a direct, earth-shattering hit. My hands still faintly glowed, the residual power tingling, as I dared to wonder about the outcome, about the absolute dominion I had just exerted. But then it hit me. I looked, and my entire being was filled with an overwhelming shock and utter confusion. My face contorted, twisting into an expression of extreme distress and primal fear, a searing cut already marring my cheek. I tried to speak, to utter a single coherent word, but only a choked, ragged sound escaped my throat. My attack had just detonated, a cataclysmic explosion, but Berserk, that metallic menace, just stood there, completely unyielding amidst the billowing smoke. Its four predatory swords were still poised, untouched, mockingly pristine. A cold, robotic hum emanated from its unyielding form. I stared in disbelief, my mind screaming, why was it standing there, perfectly triumphant, after everything I had just thrown at it? My face, I knew, was a mask of absolute frustration, a grim testament to the despair clawing at my very soul. Every ounce of my power, every desperate effort, was failing. Why was nothing working against this impenetrable titan? Then the ultimate betrayal. My candle, my very source of power, flickered, a weak, dying gasp. My overwhelming energy was draining away. It pulsed again, a frantic, desperate stutter, each flicker a chilling echo of my diminishing strength. "Be careful," I snarled, a silent plea to the dying flame, to my own evaporating might. Suddenly, the air itself shrieked as brutal, razor-sharp laser beams tore through the space, streaking towards me with aggressive, murderous intent. I braced, my fierce defense flaring, and endured the thunderous impact, a guttural exclamation of sheer effort ripping from my throat. My focus sharpened, narrowing to a pinprick, every nerve screaming for a solution. I became a phantom, a blur of motion, swiftly moving, weaving through the destructive onslaught, evading the crushing, relentless attacks. My mind screamed, I cannot waste another flicker of my precious candle, not a single drop more of my essence. My teeth were gritted so hard I thought they would shatter. My face contorted in a strained grimace that betrayed both my intense effort and the searing pain coursing through me. Even unleashing my devastating fire, my ultimate weapon, was now an incredibly draining, soul-crushing endeavor. Yes, even my glorious flame attacks, once limitless, were now bleeding me dry. I twisted, spun, a dance of pure survival, dodging multiple searing laser beams as they slammed into the ground around me. Each impact a tremor of impending doom. Desperation clawed at me. What could I possibly do? A sickening thought echoed in my mind. My efforts might not even work. Then with a sudden, horrifying lurch, I plummeted. The very ground beneath me gave way, and I descended into the abyssal depths below. My eyes, wide with intense focus, stared upwards, trying to comprehend the impossible. As I fell, a chilling sight, Berserk, that monstrous machine, stood menacingly on a high ledge, observing my forced descent, a sharp, triumphant sound emanating from its core. It was watching its prey fall. My mind raced, frantically searching, intensely analyzing, for even the slightest hint of a weakness in this metallic leviathan. A holographic interface flared around me, depicting my combat stance, ready for the next brutal exchange. My teeth gritted again, this time with a new, burning, intense determination. I would find a way. I found myself standing alone, a single defiant figure in a vast, desolate, unforgiving landscape. I looked up, my eyes scanning the oppressive sky, wondering what fresh hell was now unfolding. A strange, unsettling calm settled. Why was it not attacking me? The silence was more terrifying than any barrage. Suddenly, a new presence. The scarred white man, his face a chilling tableau, took a deliberate, menacing step forward, invading my fiery landscape. I flinched, my senses screaming, as a searing laser beam violently slammed into the scorched ground directly before me, a terrifying declaration of war. I was in absolute shock, momentarily frozen by the sheer destructive power. The ground itself erupted violently from the impact, a geyser of pulverized earth, sending razor-sharp shards and choking dust flying into the poisoned air. I observed the cataclysmic aftermath of that ground eruption, my mind racing, a cold, calculated reevaluation of this entire brutal engagement taking hold. I continued to relentlessly analyze the situation, a chilling thought solidifying. Were its attacks somehow sensing my very movements? Was this monster learning my patterns? With that terrifying realization, a burst of raw power ripped from me. I unleashed a devastating move, violently disrupting the very ground beneath me, tearing it asunder to unleash my audacious new strategy. My expression was now utterly determined, forged by this newfound, brutal understanding. I declared my intention, a roar of defiance, to counterattack. This monster was about to learn who it was fighting. In a horrifying, direct response, the red tentacle robot, a monstrosity of metal and fury, dramatically powered up, its very core throbbing with ominous energy. Berserk unleashed another terrifying laser beam, firing it directly forward, a blinding spear of destruction. Even more raw, destructive energy radiated from its colossal mechanical form, a clear sign it was escalating its assault. I braced myself, every fiber of my being taut, fueled by a fierce, unyielding determination against that overwhelming, powerful attack. Then a brutal, crushing blow. I was caught, suspended in midair, Berseraka's horrifying limbs constricting around me with bone-crushing force. Yet, even in that agonizing moment, my mind was already racing, furiously considering a radically new approach. With a roar that tore through the very air, I unleashed a powerful, absolutely decisive move, an explosion of pure will and concentrated energy. Berserk retaliated instantly, a truly massive, widespread blast erupting from its central body, engulfing everything in a destructive wave of terrifying force. It was pure annihilation, but I was faster, stronger. I unleashed a powerful, devastating slash, a blinding arc of pure power. This was it, my decisive counterattack. With a sickening crunch of metal, I dismembered Berserk, tearing it apart. As I moved, my body tilted, a strategic maneuver, my mind already forming the intricate plan to turn its own destructive beam back against itself, to make its power its undoing. Then, with a primal scream of raw power, I violently unleashed a torrent of pure force downwards, impacting an unseen target with immense, shattering power. This was my domain, my battle, and my victory was now within reach. My absolute fury erupted in a primal scream. My eyes narrowed to slits of pure demolition as I directed an overwhelming torrent of force downwards. I relentlessly drove my devastating attack, a pure surge of my immense power, downwards, impacting Berserk with an earth-shattering finality. I raised a hand, an energy weapon coalescing and swirling around my arm, prepared for another powerful, annihilating strike. But it was unnecessary. Berserk's very essence screamed in metallic agony, its intricate internal mechanisms tearing themselves apart, revealing exposed wires and sparking components in a symphony of catastrophic malfunction. I stood triumphantly over the defeated behemoth, an undeniable victor. Berserk's core was revealed, a shattered wreck of wires and broken metallic structure, utterly ruined by my relentless assault. My determined expression settled, my hand pressing against my chin, the gears of my mind already spinning with overwhelming intent. I made a monumental decision, a choice that would reshape everything. Later, my weary face reflected back at me from a mirror adorned with an opulent golden floral design, a stark reminder of the immense battles I had just conquered. It is day 3 of the trial of the Guardian Flame. As day 3 of the trial of the Guardian Flame continued, I slumped, utterly spent, in the oppressive darkness, my lungs burning with every ragged breath. Each gasp was a desperate prayer, my body screaming its rebellion. My gaze fixed on the tiny, defiant flame of my candle, a silent fury building within me. Why hadn't the bell rung? Why was this hell not over? A chilling premonition gripped my soul. Was this truly the end, or was the ultimate, soul-crushing test yet to be unleashed? I stared into the abyss, knowing with absolute certainty that my reserves, my very essence, were teetering on the precipice of oblivion. A raw, guttural murmur escaped my lips, a sound born of profound uncertainty as my mind raced, trying to grasp the impossible. My thoughts snapped back to the grotesque, writhing monster flesh I had just barely survived. My eyes narrowed, fixating on the sickening, inert blobs of flesh surrounding me. Had one just moved? Was my exhausted mind playing tricks? Then a nauseating plop echoed through the cavern as one of those vile masses distinctly ruptured on its surface. My initial shock twisted into a frantic, undeniable dread. My suspicions, my deepest fears, were sickeningly real. My vision sharpened, every nerve screaming as I watched the horrifying truth unfold. It was getting closer. Beneath me, a veritable ocean of crimson, pulsating flesh began to bloat and bubble with revolting blorp sounds. The monster's vile regeneration was undeniable, an affront to all reason. The cancerous growth continued its relentless expansion, one monstrous blob merging into another with a wet, grotesque plop. Before my disbelieving eyes, the collective mass of flesh began to converge with impossible speed, stretching and contorting into a new, terrifying form. It solidified into a colossal, gnarled, purple abomination, like a twisted, living tree reaching for the heavens, its tips glowing with malevolent energy, guttural roars tearing through the silence. My entire being recoiled in pure, unadulterated shock and alarm. This beast wasn't merely regenerating. It was exploding in size, a horrifying, unstoppable force of nature. I stared, utterly bewildered, at the fully materialized Leviathan. Why was this happening? Why was this nightmare intensifying beyond all logical limits? My mind raced, the only answer I could grasp being the overwhelming, suffocating density of the magic power saturating this hellish domain. A primal scream of frustration clawed at my throat as I continued my desperate, losing battle against exhaustion and despair. My voice, a raw testament to my alarm, tore through the air, demanding to know where the blasted bell was. Kieran appeared beside me, a grim reminder of our shared predicament. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that I had to endure until that bell rang, that my only lifeline, my only hope, was the fragile, defiant flicker of my candle. An urgent, primal instinct roared through me. I had to get out. Now. Suddenly, a single, malevolent blue eye, burning with abyssal light, pierced the darkness, belonging to a shadowy monster that had materialized from the very air. Then, the true horror descended. A legion of creatures, countless in number, materialized around me, their forms indistinguishable in the gloom, their hunger palpable. I bolted, a blur of motion through the oppressive gloom of the cavern, my precious, tiny candle held aloft like a sacred beacon against the encroaching darkness. Every ounce of my focus was on that fragile, dancing flame, a minuscule point of defiance in the face of absolute despair. Its faint glow illuminated my trembling hands, a horrifying truth hammering at my soul. Even the slightest brush from one of those monstrous aberrations, and my lifeline would be extinguished forever. Suddenly, I was completely engulfed, a lone island in a surging tide of grotesque, ravenous beasts, their forms closing in from every conceivable direction. My grip on the candle became a death clutch, my teeth gritted, a singular, desperate command echoing in my mind. Hold on, just hold on. My face was a mask of sheer agony and unyielding resolve, every muscle strained, every sinew taut with the effort. A colossal, shark-like monstrosity, its maw a gaping cavern of razor-sharp teeth, lunged from the horde, its terrifying attack mirroring the relentless assault of its brethren. Then a glorious, impossible beacon burst forth from the distant end of the impossibly long, lightless cavern, a vision of salvation. My entire being jolted, every nerve screaming with renewed purpose at this sudden, breathtaking phenomenon. The world exploded in a searing agony as an unseen impact ripped into my back, hot blood erupting from my wounds. Yet, through the blinding pain and shock, my eyes shot upwards, my defiant grip on the candle unwavering, as I understood the impossible truth. This was the exit. I grimaced, a guttural sound of pure defiance, as I endured another savage assault, my body a tapestry of fresh, agonizing injuries, each one screaming its protest. My entire existence was a furious, desperate struggle to simply hold on. Through the white-hot agony that threatened to consume me, I screamed the truth to the universe. I only needed a little more. My trembling hand, a conduit of sheer, indomitable will, stretched out, straining, reaching for that glorious escape at the cavern's impossible end. I was reaching for the outside, for freedom, for survival against all odds. My eyes exploded wide open in pure, unadulterated alarm, a primal scream tearing through the air, demanding my immediate descent. I was already moving, an instinct of pure survival overriding all else. I instinctively hit the ground, just as an overwhelming, cataclysmic force erupted, a literal wave of pure power that instantly devoured and annihilated the hordes of recoiling monsters surrounding me. They had no chance against such absolute dominance. The air itself wept fragments of what moments ago had been terrifying beasts, now just lingering energy, dust, and shattered menace falling like grim confetti around my barely protected form. I clawed my way upward, my body screaming in protest, every fiber of my being burning with distress, only to find Kieran, a veritable titan, standing impossibly close, his presence a suffocating weight. My gaze, heavy with a crushing, bitter resignation, finally met his, just as Kieran's voice, a chilling pronouncement, declared that my time, my meager struggle, was definitively over. He stood, a victor etched in stone, towering triumphantly over my broken form, an undeniable testament to his crushing superiority. I lay there, a discarded puppet, my mind a maelstrom of raw, agonizing data, every fiber of my consciousness desperately trying to comprehend the whirlwind of events. Was this truly the end? Had my journey just crashed and burned? Kieran's gaze, a cold, calculating assessment, bore down upon me, a physical weight that pressed me deeper into the unforgiving ground. A guttural, agonizing sound tore itself from my throat as a fresh, searing wound on my back, a raw testament to my brutal defeat, began to visibly bleed, staining the earth crimson. Then, with absolute finality, Kieran affirmed it. "It is over," his voice resonated, sealing my fate. Despite my utterly mangled state, he held me, his grip surprisingly firm, and spoke, a strange declaration echoing in my ears. I had endured well. What cruel irony was this? The overwhelming agony, the catastrophic weight of my grave injuries, finally claimed me, dragging my vision into an abyss of absolute darkness as my eyes surrendered and closed. Then, with a gasp that tore through my very soul, I was awake. My vision snapped into brutal clarity, and I found myself in a place of impossible grandeur, seated upon an impossibly ornate, gleaming golden throne, presiding over a vast, echoing chamber that stretched into oblivion. Utter bewilderment seized me. My very being screamed questions at the oppressive silence. What was this place? A dream? A new, twisted trial? The answer slammed into me with the force of a divine revelation. This was the ceremonial chamber, a place steeped in ancient, terrifying power. Then, as if summoned by my very thoughts, Arthur materialized, standing with an unshakable confidence that radiated pure, unyielding authority directly before me. Her gaze, an unwavering beacon of power, pierced straight ahead, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, a silent promise of momentous things to come. That confident smirk, a mask of pure power, became more defined on Arthur's face as I, a mere mortal, dared to call out her name. Suddenly, as if conjured from thin air, a colossal ceremonial gathering coalesced around us, every figure bathed in an ethereal, otherworldly light, a spectacle of overwhelming significance. Arthur's voice, a sonic boom of authority, then began her earth-shattering announcement, declaring that from this precise, pivotal moment, everything would commence. The very air vibrated with her pronouncement. The rite of passage, the legendary trial of the Guardian Flame, had officially begun. My destiny, forged in fire, was now irreversibly underway. That declaration, the raw, unyielding truth of the trial's inception, resonated through every atom of my being, shaking the very foundations of my existence. Arthur, a vision of absolute command, then turned her formidable attention to the assembled Titans, the Sacred Order of Knights, initiating a new, even more profound phase of this cataclysmic ceremony. Her words sliced through the air. They, the legends themselves, would now reveal their sacred vows and legendary arms, all to prove their trust to me, Leica, the newest, most unexpected recruit. The sheer audacity of it all was overwhelming. Then, with a blinding flash of impossible speed and razor-sharp precision, an action so swift it barely registered, exploded before my eyes. A gleaming spear, a weapon of legend, materialized and impaled the very ground before me. The voice that followed was Kieran's, his identity revealed in a thunderous declaration, captain of the 9th Division. His vow, a chilling testament to his iron will, was to never take a family. A complete, terrifying dedication to his path. Then, Fran, radiating an almost arrogant pride, stepped forward, her presence a whirlwind of raw power, introducing herself as the indomitable captain of the 2nd Division. Her vow, to forsake food for life. An insane, absolute commitment that defied mortal comprehension. Next, a sharp, unnerving scratching sound echoed through the chamber, a prelude to another revelation. Kenneth, a shadowy figure, then materialized, clutching a glowing green pistol that pulsed with arcane energy. He declared his name, Kenneth, the enigmatic vice-captain of the 2nd Division. His vow was simple, yet utterly profound, never to tell a lie. An absolute commitment to truth in a world built on shadows. Next, Grift, his expression a mask of unyielding seriousness, then stepped into the ethereal light, introducing himself with chilling gravitas as the unyielding captain of the 4th Division. His vow was a horrifying, absolute dedication, to dedicate his very right arm, his instrument of power, to God. A sacrifice of epic proportions. Then Jack, his presence a surge of unexpected energy, emerged, introducing himself as Jack, the flamboyant vice-captain of the 6th Division. His vow, a shocking declaration, was to remain a virgin for life. An unbelievable sacrifice, truly. My mind reeled. Pure, unadulterated surprise ripped through me. This was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Next, Gavin, a bulwark of pure defiance, stood, an ornate shield, clearly an artifact of immense power, clutched firmly in his grasp. His voice, a rumbling thunder, declared his identity. Gavin, the formidable vice-commander of the Sacred Order itself. His vow, an impossible feat of endurance, was to never sleep. An eternal vigilance, a terrifying testament to his devotion. Gavin then concluded his earth-shattering speech with a pregnant, dramatic pause, the very air thick with anticipation, clearly about to unleash the true, terrifying nature of his legendary shield. Instead, his words, imbued with chilling solemnity, were a vow he would never forgive betrayal against the Sacred Order. A promise of merciless retribution. Then, it was Arthur's turn. Her introduction, a declaration of ultimate power, began as she simply stated her name. She continued, her voice resonating with absolute, unyielding authority. asserting her prestigious, awe-inspiring title, Commander of the Sacred Order itself. And then, with the force of a collapsing star, Arthur made her own, utterly terrifying declaration about her vow. Arthur, a force of pure presence, was unveiled. A brilliant, ornate sword soared aloft in her grip, a powerful, ceremonial stance radiating an almost unbearable light. My world itself paused. I looked up, my eyes wide, utterly shocked to my core by the spectacle unfolding before me. She declared a momentous vow, a complete renunciation of gender itself, a declaration that shook the very foundations of reality around us. I was then seated, overwhelmed, upon a gilded throne. Arthur's gaze, sharp as a blade, swept over me, acknowledging me as the newest recruit. The command resonated, a thunderclap in my mind. Reveal my arms, declare my vow. My destiny was being forged right there. Arthur's single red eye burned into me, a scrutinizing gaze that pierced my very soul. That crimson eye, an inferno of judgment and expectation, remained fixed, a terrifying sign of the immense trust she was placing upon me. Distress consumed me upon that throne. A hesitant sound, a mere whisper of my internal torment, escaped my lips. Anguish, raw and undeniable, twisted my face. Then a monstrous surge. Intense energy erupted from within my core, crackling with blinding light and shimmering, glowing particles. From the depths of my being, a devastating power surged upward, outward, consuming everything. I rose, a titan of power, my muscular torso now crisscrossed with aggressive, red vein-like marks, my long hair whipping around me in a dramatic, untamed cascade. An arena of intense energy radiated from my unveiled, terrifying form. This was my true awakening. Gavin, a fortress of calm, merely observed, while all others recoiled, their eyes wide with utter shock, exclaiming at the sheer, overwhelming force of my display. Gavin, that formidable warrior, then sharpened his focus, his gaze a laser beam upon me. It was in that moment of absolute power that I declared my true name, Ryuka. I then began to declare my sacred vow, the oath that would bind my very existence. A single bead of sweat, a stark testament to my inner turmoil, traced a path down my cheek. I strained, attempting to articulate the monumental vow that demanded utterance. Hesitantly, agonizingly, I started to state what my vow was. My gaze fell, uncertainty a crushing weight. I admitted, with a heavy heart, the devastating truth. I did not know my vow. I contemplated this terrifying, glorious newfound power, a storm raging within my soul. My uncertainty about my vow became a palpable force, a suffocating shroud around me. And then, from the swirling darkness, an absolute nightmare materialized. A dark, shadowy entity, its eyes glowing with malevolent crimson, a menacing grin splitting its horrifying face. This spectral horror loomed over me, an insidious reminder of a sacrifice, of something irrevocably given up. Arthur's intense eye, a searing inferno of expectation, zoomed into my vision. But I would not break. With a surge of defiant determination and an unyielding spark of hope, I lifted my gaze, ready to plunge into an all-consuming internal struggle. I declared my absolute, unwavering will to persevere against any torment. It was then that I began the arduous, bloody path to earning the trust of every soul present. I stated my ironclad resolve, my unbreakable oath, to become stronger than anyone, a titan unmatched. I affirmed my sacred commitment. I could not, allow anyone else to suffer injury again. This was my ultimate mission. I declared, with every fiber of my being, that I must save them, save everyone, before the terrifying vision I held in my mind twisted into a horrifying reality. My eyes, thoughtful and intense, then lifted to ponder the profound, flickering flame of life before us. My expression remained etched with deep thought as the devastating realization slammed into me. I needed to find a new, unimaginable strength. Then Arthur, a colossal presence, stood before me, sword in hand, and declared their acceptance of my burning resolve for strength as the ultimate proof of their trust in my power. The vertical scar man, a warrior of immense presence, visibly recoiled, a sound of utter surprise ripped from his throat. Arthur, a smirk playing on her lips, continued her monumental statement. My eyes snapped wide, utterly shocked as Arthur, with a voice that echoed through my very bones, welcomed me into the sacred order of knights. I looked up, my eyes wide with an unshakable determination, ready to conquer any challenge. Kenneth and another unknown warrior then slammed their fists into their chests, a powerful gesture of ultimate allegiance. Even Kieran and Fran, normally stoic, observed this monumental event with an undeniable intensity. The air itself vibrated with an intense sound, triggering a dynamic, catastrophic swirling of energy and earth-shattering impact around me. I stood a colossus, utterly consumed and surrounded by that raw, untamed energy. Later, Arthur, a figure of undeniable authority, strode through a shadowed hallway. She paused as Gavin, a pillar of stern judgment, unleashed his scathing assessment upon someone who could not even utter their fundamental vow. Gavin, a storm of doubt, questioned the very suitability of such a candidate to even dare join our sacred order. And then, with an authoritative voice that cut through the tension, Arthur called for Gavin. Arthur, fierce and unyielding, unleashed her counterargument, an immediate reminder to Gavin that he had engineered the very conditions I had conquered. She hammered the point, declaring my triumph in the trial absolute proof of my worth, undeniable entry into their ranks. My overwhelming success, she asserted, was all the trust anyone could ever demand. Yet, a deep concern etched itself onto her face as she spoke of the peril, of the sheer risk of an unrevealed vow. Gavin, however, remained fixated on my untamed nature, his gaze piercing. My raw, magnificent irregularity, he growled, was the core of the problem. He dared to question the unthinkable. What if my terrifying, unique power endangered the very sacred order, or even ludicrously, threatened to consume me? Arthur, with a dismissive wave, simply told him his anxieties were utterly unfounded, barely worth her breath. Gavin, that ancient stubborn pillar, could only observe, his eyes drilling into my very soul. But Arthur's gaze, luminous and knowing, was fixed not on him, but on my flame. That roaring, infernal power that courses through my very being. She then delivered the absolute truth, a shockwave that silenced all doubt. My flame, my essence, surges with impossible might the closer I danced to death's terrifying embrace. It would become, she proclaimed, our ultimate strength, a weapon forged from the abyss itself. Gavin's eyes, those ancient, cynical windows, exploded wide, finally betraying the profound shock that rippled through him. And then, the world softened. My deep, resonant laughter, a roaring declaration of triumph, echoed with Fran's pure joy. Kieran and Kenneth added their own unburdened mirth, as we stood, bathed in an impossibly bright, warm light, a beacon of our shared, undeniable victory. It was a pure, overwhelming moment of victorious happiness, earned in blood and fire.